Chapter 1327. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. As the cannons rumbled, several hundred explosive cannonballs landed on the city walls and gates of the southern city, causing a strange phenomenon as if an earth dragon had flipped over. The sound of the cannons went on for an hour. Looking at the tower of the south city, it was already full of holes. Even the south city gate had been blasted into pieces. The cave door was wide open, like a young girl who was open for anyone to take advantage of. Charge! Seeing that the city gate had been broken, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie led the tens of thousands of soldiers excitedly, shouting as they charged forward. There were a few 5-star army soldiers lying in ambush on top of the south city tower. Because they had entered a safe zone in advance, they didn't suffer any losses. Seeing a large number of Baiming army charging at them, they followed the plan and fired 2 volleys of arrows at the city gate tower. After killing and injuring several thousand Baiming army soldiers, they quickly retreated. The south city tower changed hands. Taking this opportunity, the 2 generals led their troops to the east, west, and north respectively. After paying a certain price, they successfully occupied the outer city of the beginning city. The outer city was breached. When the news came, Gao Yu was naturally very excited. He waved his fist fiercely to vent the excitement in his heart. In the main tent, Li Keguang, Ho Xiangjie, and Wei Ku were standing together. Gao Yu looked at the 3 of them with appreciation and said with satisfaction, "You guys have done very well. This supervisor has already submitted a memorial to the emperor regarding your performance. The reward should be coming soon. Many thanks to military supervisor for your promotion." The 3 generals said excitedly. "Very good. This military supervisor wants to tell you and the others that you will be rewarded for your contributions. You should work even harder. Now that we've taken the outer city, when can we take the inner city and attack the inner city? That's what we need to discuss today. If you have any suggestions, feel free to raise them." Gao Yu began to ask questions after a round of praise. After all, conquering and occupying the entire origin city was his goal. Conquering the outer city was just the first step. With the previous victory, the 3 generals were each more courageous than the other when it came to strategizing. After listening to the opinions of the 3 people, Gao Yu finally understood the opinions of the 3 people. That was, they still needed to increase the number of troops. The best plan was to take down the first city in one go with the advantage of a strong military force. Although the Baiming army managed to capture the outer city with the help of the cannons, their losses were not small. Originally, there were 170,000 infantrymen. Now, after deducting the injured and 20,000 firearms, there were less than 100,000 infantrymen who could truly attack the city. Speaking of which, 100,000 soldiers was not a small number. However, this time, they were going to face the 5-star army's base in the grasslands. 100,000 people might not be enough. When Gao Yu saw that the 3 generals had the same opinion, she also felt that what they said made sense. Immediately, he said that he would order the troops to be transferred from Tulu City. He wanted to take this opportunity to rest and reorganize the army. When the reinforcements arrived, they would launch a fierce attack on the city. They wanted to attack the beginning city as happily as they attacked the outer city. Within the city of Talu, there were still 130,000 northern soldiers. Previously, because she did not know the details of the 5-star army, Gao Yu did not send them out in order to prevent accidents. But now that the army was progressing so smoothly, it would be too wasteful to leave these soldiers in Tulu City. After Gao Yu gave the order, 80,000 soldiers left the city and rushed in the direction of the first city. This move seemed to be Gao Yu's heavy bet, but at the same time, it was also the beginning of her defeat. The success of luring the snake out of its hole also meant that the 5-star army could finally let loose and fight back with all their strength. Yang Xie's intelligence personnel in Tulu City reported the news as soon as the 80,000 infantrymen gathered in the city. Yang Chendong, who had been watching every move in Tulu City, immediately laughed. "Good, the enemy has entered the trap. We can start the operation." "Sixth young master, please give the order." The several high-ranking officers of the 5-star army standing in the tent all looked at Yang Chendong. Looking at everyone's eager appearance, Yang Chendong knew that they were ready. He did not hold back and came to the sand table and loudly ordered, "Commander Nyo Duo of the Army, I order you to send a division to quickly seize Saihan Mountain and cut off the 80,000 Baiming army reinforcements from Gao Yu's main army." Nyo Duo immediately saluted after hearing the order. "New 2nd Army Commander Shibi, you send 2 divisions to cut off the 80,000 Baiming army's retreat after they leave Tulu City. Don't let any of them return to the city. This time, you may face a pincer attack from the 80,000 infantrymen and the 50,000 Baiming army in Tulu City. Can you do it?" This was a very important mission, and they had to be careful. Yang Chendong wanted to give this mission to Shibi. "Your subordinate will personally take 2 divisions to carry out this mission. We definitely won't let a single Baiming army member escape back into Tulu City," Shibi said in a clear voice. This was the new 2nd Army's first battle after being reorganized, and it was going to be carried out right under Yang Chendong's nose. They could only win, not lose. This was his creed. Yang Chendong silently nodded. Although the mission was a bit difficult, if the new 2nd Army wanted to stand up again, they had to go through this kind of experience. Without looking back, Yang Chendong ordered again, 1 division of the new 2nd Army and 1 division of the 2nd Army. Make use of the advantage of the war horses to cut down the encirclement of the 80,000 infantrymen. This is to inflict heavy damage on the enemy and destroy their morale. The 2 commanders, Shibi and Nyo Duo, immediately agreed, expressing that they would pass on the mission to their subordinate division commanders. At this point, Yang Chendong turned his gaze to the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu had been standing there like a pole but hadn't accepted a mission yet. When he saw Yang Chendong's gaze, Tian Hu straightened his back. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning was quite clear. "6th Young Master, if you have any difficult missions, leave them to us. We promise to complete them." "Commander Tian, 100,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry have disappeared from our line of sight. They might appear at any time. Your mission is to stop them from entering the battlefield and inflict as much damage as possible. This is a powerful enemy. Baiming has invested a lot in them, and they have 5 times your number. Can you stop them?" When Yang Chendong asked this, he was also carefully observing Tian Hu's expression. Speaking of which, their mission was the most difficult. If they didn't handle it well, it was possible that the whole division would be wiped out. When he heard that they were finally going to face Baiming's Liaodong cavalry, even though he knew that the other party had 100,000 soldiers, Tian Hu didn't show any fear on his face. On the contrary, there was only a rumbling fighting spirit. "6th Young Master, don't worry. Our 1st Cavalry Division is not afraid of any opponent or enemy. No matter if they are weak or strong, as long as they face us, they will only be defeated." "Good." Hearing Tian Hu's confident answer, Yang Chendong walked forward and patted his shoulder, then said, "Your fighting spirit is commendable. But I still have to say that the opponent this time is not simple. You must not be careless. I have already sent a new group of soldiers. They will send people out of the city to help you. There is also a heavy cavalry regiment near the beginning city. If things go wrong, they will go to the beginning city and meet up with them to launch a counterattack. Remember, don't use loyalty in war, and don't use the lives of your soldiers as a stepping stone." When Tian Hu heard such sincere words, he once again stood at attention and said, "6th Young Master, I will remember your words in my heart. Watch my performance." "Well, I will watch your performance." Speaking of which, this king is preparing to expand the world's 1st Cavalry Division into an army. I hope that you can have the vision of a general. What this king wants is a general who can devise strategies, not a tiger general who can only charge into battle. Do you understand? This was the first time Yang Chendong talked about expanding the 1st Cavalry Division into an army in public. There wasn't any news about it before. So everyone was surprised after hearing it. The current 1st Cavalry Division already had 20,000 soldiers. Its combat strength was not something that any army could compare with. Now that he wanted to expand it, didn't that mean that its combat strength was close to that of a group army, or even surpassing them? There was no doubt that once it became an army, the value of a commander would definitely surpass that of other commanders. Even the power of a group army commander would be on par with that of a group army commander. After everyone understood this, they looked at Tianhu with envy and a little jealousy. Tianhu's face turned red. This meant that the sixth young master wanted to promote him. At the same time, it was also a kind of affirmation to the 1st Cavalry Division. He immediately stood at attention and said, "Yes, sixth young master, please rest assured. Tianhu is a wise general, not just a general who knows how to kill." Knowing that Tianhu understood the meaning of his words, Yang Chendong patted his shoulder with satisfaction and said, "Very good. Then I will watch your performance. Don't let me down." "Yes, teacher." After feeling Yang Chendong's ardent expectations, Tianhu changed the way he addressed him and called him teacher. This was to express in private that he would definitely complete the mission. The combat missions of the various troops had been completed. Yang Chendong's gaze wandered around the faces of the 3 military commanders, then he nodded and said, "Well, I look forward to your performance. Let's set off now." "Yes." After Tianhu, Shi Bei, and Niu Duo saluted in unison, they turned and walked towards the troops. After watching the 3 of them leave, Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, came over and asked in a low voice, "Young master, what are we going to do? Our 2,000 black cavalry has been itching for a fight." In this battle, the Baiming army sent 80,000 infantrymen out of the city, and there were 50,000 defending infantrymen in Tulu City who could come out at any time. In addition to the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry who had been wandering outside without a fixed residence, there were a total of 200,000 people. On the other hand, Yang Chendong only had 20,000 people from the 1st Cavalry Division, more than 20,000 people from the 3 divisions of the new 2nd Army, and more than 10,000 people from the 2 divisions of the 2nd Army. In total, there were only 60,000 people. The difference in strength was more than 3 times, but Beta Persei was not nervous at all. On the contrary, he was worried that the 2,000 black cavalry would have no battle to fight. It had to be said that he was very careless, but it also proved how much trust and confidence he had in Yang Chendong. Chapter 1328. What's wrong? More than 200,000 enemies aren't enough for the black cavalry? Just wait and see. We'll go wherever there's danger. Yang Chendong chuckled. He liked Beta Persei's optimistic personality and fearless courage. Hearing that the black cavalry could go to the battlefield, Beta Persei immediately laughed. "Okay, young master, then I'll tell my brothers the news now. I guarantee that they'll all be overjoyed." First City. The military report of 80,000 Baiming infantry leaving Teru City was also sent to Tiger's man via telegram. He first laughed, then looked at the Logistics Command Commander Yang Si, Castellan Yumian, Division Commander Xiao Yining of the 5th Division Lu, and 3 other commanders and a division commander in the conference room. He said in a deep voice, "It's time for our new army group in First City to stretch our hands. Now announce the order." After everyone, including Yumian, stood up straight, Tiger's man said, "The 101st Division and the Heavy Cavalry Regiment will go out of the city to find the Baiming Liaodong Cavalry and cooperate with the 1st Cavalry Division to find and destroy the enemy. The 102nd Division and the 103rd Division will surround the Baiming army outside the city from the left and right respectively and strive to capture all of them. The 5th Division Lu will cover the Baiming army's artillery camp before the battle and go out of the city to severely damage the enemy's firearms camp. Let them know that we're their ancestors when it comes to firearms. The Logistics Command will be responsible for going out of the city to take care of the prisoners and clean up the battlefield. The Castellan's mansion will be responsible for defending the city and security in the city. At the same time, empty several hospitals in the city and prepare to receive the enemy's wounded." After issuing several orders in a row, Tiger's man suddenly raised his voice and said, "The 6th young master will be watching this battle not far away. Whoever has a problem should prepare to leave the army and go back to retire. We promise to complete the mission." Everyone answered in unison. As the 5-star army continued to grow stronger, the number of reserve talents also increased. Who knew how many people were eyeing the position below their buttocks? If he didn't perform well, Tiger's mane wasn't joking. He would really retire early. This was related to his own future, so he couldn't afford to be careless or careless. Tiger's mane knew that his words had worked when he saw the solemn expressions on everyone's faces. He nodded quietly and then said, "Okay, go and prepare. Rest well tonight. Tomorrow morning, we will go out and fight." Saihan Mountain. This was an important mountain between the first city and Tulu City. As a link between the two cities, it served as a buffer. Saihan Mountain, which had experienced countless wars, had changed hands many times. It was used as the gate of the first city to defend against enemies. This time was no exception. Bai Ming's first target was this place. However, because the five-star army was prepared and gave up in advance, it allowed Bai Ming's army to take down this important place without shedding any blood. However, because it was too easy to get, it didn't attract enough attention. Even Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie, who were the vanguard generals, didn't leave any troops here. However, when Gao Yu passed by here, she casually pointed and arranged for 3,000 soldiers to be here. Most of these 3,000 soldiers were made up of new recruits. Many people were happy to be arranged here. Originally, they joined the army for food and pay. In the eyes of such people, there was no such thing as loyalty to the country. The facts also proved that after they changed from ordinary people to members of the Bai Ming army, their lives didn't change much. The salary wasn't distributed in time, and they were usually only 60% full after eating. This made them complain a lot. This time, when they heard that they were going to fight against the awe-inspiring Bugnam of Gojoseon and the powerful five-star army, many soldiers were scared before the battle. They just wanted to eat food and didn't have any great ambitions. There was no one above them, and even if they made military achievements, most of them would be taken away, and their future was bleak. They just wanted to live and become soldiers. It was too difficult for such people to show their heroic side on the battlefield. Fortunately, these 3,000 soldiers were lucky. They didn't need to go to the front line. They only needed to guard the mountain and watch the Bai Ming army's supplies pass smoothly. This made the 3,000 soldiers very happy. They didn't need to fight and they might be able to get military achievements. This was really a blessing from the heavens. For this reason, the 3,000 soldiers had a good celebration. Then, the next day, they began to guard the mountain and muddle along. They were muddling along because they had nothing to do from morning to night. Apart from occasionally seeing the Bai Ming supply vehicles, they didn't see anyone else. As for the five-star army, they didn't even see a shadow. After a few days, the initial nervousness had disappeared. Now, when the sky had just turned dark, apart from 200 soldiers who were normally on duty, the rest of the 3,000 soldiers had entered the temporary military tent and started to talk with Zhou Gong. In the pitch-black night, 50 well-trained scouts with sharp blades in their mouths approached quickly under the cover of the trees. They were like agile monkeys, flashing and moving behind the Bai Ming army soldiers. As they continued to move, the Bai Ming army soldiers were either killed or knocked unconscious. In just 15 minutes, the 200 night watch soldiers had lost all signs of life. When Mo Benyi, the commander of the 306th Division of the Army, saw this scene, he couldn't help but shake his head. New recruits are new recruits. There's no challenge at all. They didn't even send out hidden sentries. All right, everyone go up. Don't make any noise. Get ready to capture the prisoners. The 3,000 Bai Ming army soldiers who didn't have the slightest bit of vigilance and never thought that someone would attack them had large swords pressed against their necks while they were still sleeping in their tents. The entire operation was methodical and orderly. In this battle, other than the 123 Bai Ming army soldiers who were killed at the beginning, the rest, including the general, were all captured. No one resisted, and this Bai Ming army was completely wiped out. Send a message to the military commander. Tell him that we've taken down Mount Saihan. Mo Benyi instructed the radio operator sent by the military. With his rank, he wasn't qualified to be on the radio. If he hadn't come out alone to complete the mission, he wouldn't have been able to enjoy such treatment. As they didn't make any noise, the Bai Ming army didn't know that Mount Saihan had changed hands. It wasn't until the afternoon of the second day that the 80,000 reinforcements from Tulu City passed by this place that they realized the danger ahead was imminent. These rocks were placed by the 306th Division soldiers overnight and half a day. Of course, the 3,000 Baiming captives also contributed a lot. As the huge rocks rolled down one after another, the 5-star Army's full-scale counterattack began. As Mo Benyi's side began to take action, the 5-star Army in Beginning City also began their counterattack. The Lu 5th Division in the city had already locked onto the Baiming Army's firearms camp outside the city. After the order was given, cannonballs were shot out from within the city. After a few consecutive shots, explosions sounded one after another. The resulting explosions formed a sea of fire, alarming the 100,000 Baiming infantrymen below the city. "What's going on?" Gao Yu, who heard the explosions, rushed out of the main tent. His face was filled with panic and anger. However, his anger quickly turned into fear. One after another, scouts appeared in front of him as if they had agreed to meet. Reporting to the military supervisor, the 5-star Army's cannons hit our firearms camp's cannons. Now, all the cannons have exploded and the cannonballs have also been detonated. The firearms camp has lost the ability to fight and suffered heavy losses. Reporting to the military supervisor, the 5-star Army opened the inner city gate and rushed out. They have long-range, high-speed firearms. Our brothers guarding the outer city gate couldn't hold them off and have already retreated. We're requesting for backup. Reporting to the military supervisor, countless cavalrymen rushed out of the beginning city. They're coming towards us from both sides. We're requesting for backup. Reporting to the military supervisor, listening to the bad news one after another, Gao Yu's face turned red because of anger. Suddenly he shouted, "Okay, stop talking, stop talking. Immediately organize people to hold on for me. Also, send someone to inform the 80,000 reinforcements. Tell them to speed up and come to join us under the beginning city. Also, send someone to look for General Fang Dingshan and request for cavalry support. Reinforcements." At this moment, Gao Yu already knew that the 5-star Army had started their counterattack. Moreover, it was an unexpectedly strong counterattack. From the looks of it, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. What he needed to do now was to request for reinforcements. As long as he could hold on until the reinforcements appeared, he could coordinate with them from the inside and outside and turn the tables around. How would Gao Yu know that the 80,000 infantry reinforcements he hoped for were blocked at the foot of Saihan Mountain? They couldn't move forward. And right behind them, Commander Wu Hui of the 3rd Cavalry Division of the new 2nd Army was leading his cavalrymen all the way here. They had taken Baiming's army by surprise and inflicted heavy losses. According to Yang Chendong's battle plan, the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division of the new 2nd Army stayed at the foot of Tulu City to prevent them from providing reinforcements again. The 3rd Cavalry Division and the 305th Cavalry Division of the 2nd Army would cut through the back and flank of the 80,000 Baiming's reinforcements. They no longer had the ability to support them. On the other hand, the 100,000 elite Liaodong cavalrymen led by Fang Dingshan still had the strength. However, they weren't thinking about helping Gao Yu out of his predicament. Instead, they were thinking about how to destroy the heavy cavalry regiment led by Wind-Chasing Wolf that they had surrounded. Fortunately, Yang Chendong's order was to surround and capture Baiming's army. So, even though the offensive seemed fierce, Gao Yu wasn't in any danger for the time being. When he knew that the situation wasn't good, he first sent someone to ask for reinforcements. Then, he immediately called for General Weika of the Firearms Division and had him lead the firearms soldiers to the front line to resist the 5-star Army's attacks. "Please don't worry, Army Supervisor," General Weika said confidently after receiving the mission. This time, he had brought over 10,000 firearms soldiers with him. Among them, there were quite a few soldiers who were armed with rifles. He believed that as long as he commanded them properly, even if they were facing fierce cavalry, they would be able to tear off a piece of flesh and let them know how powerful they were. Chapter 1329. Wei Ku was brimming with confidence, but it seemed that his luck wasn't too good. This time, he encountered the 5th Division of the 5-star Army, which was also a firearm unit. However, when comparing the weapons of the two sides, the disparity was like heaven and earth. After the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining, gave the order. The soldiers of the Cold Vanguard took the lead and defeated the Baiming army outside the city. They quickly reclaimed the city gate. Soon after, the scouts reported that there were over 10,000 northern Ming soldiers with firearms approaching them. Looking from afar, they seemed to be in good order and seemed to be in order. Baiming firearms troops? Xiao Yining was stunned at first, but then he laughed out loud. Good. I was just about to ask them for a lesson. Tell the soldiers that their firearms can only shoot up to 120 meters. We will take care of them outside this range. Remember, injure them as much as possible. Don't kill them unless it's necessary. They are all Han like us. To become a soldier of the Cold Vanguard, the first requirement was to be a pure Han. This was something that was never discounted. As for the other foreign warriors, no matter how well they performed, or whether they had already converted to Han nationality, they had no chance of becoming a member of the Cold Front. It could be said that in the entire 5-star army, the Cold Vanguard had the purest composition. This was also because Yang Chendong didn't want other people to have advanced firearms. Otherwise, he would have to sleep with one eye open. Xiao Yining's order was passed down to the troops, and the few regimental commanders became extremely excited. They shouted loudly, "Commanders, it's time for us to practice our target practice. Next, we will compete with our marksmanship. Let's see who is more accurate and who can injure the most enemies." The 4 regiments actually treated the battlefield as a drill. They treated the enemies as targets. They didn't care who killed the most, but who injured the most. It was really strange. When Xiao Yining heard the report, he just smiled. He knew that the 5th Division spent a lot of time training and didn't have much time on the battlefield. They all needed to vent. "Men, bring me my gun." "We're going as well," Xiao said excitedly to the officer in charge of firearms. Not long after, the cadres and soldiers of the division headquarters all carried their matching guns and rushed straight to the outer city wall of the first city. At this time, at the beginning of the city, there was already a group of soldiers from the Baiming firearms camp rushing towards the city with guns in their hands. These Baiming firearms battalion soldiers had all kinds of weapons in their hands. There were single-shot muskets, single-shot flintlocks, and 4-shot repeating pistols. Thanks to Yang Chendong, Baiming had obtained a Type 81 automatic rifle. After countless craftsmen had disassembled and studied it, although they didn't know what a lathe was and couldn't successfully imitate it, the principles behind it had been researched by smart people, and the performance of firearms had improved. It was just that the ammunition was still iron bullets. Obviously, with their strength and technology, it was impossible to make real firearms bullets. Even so, this kind of improvement could be said to be obvious. At least, it was much better than in history. However, compared to the Cold Front soldiers, the difference was not small. Just in terms of the range of a firearm, the difference between them was like heaven and earth. For some reason, the 5-star army had now eliminated the Type 81 automatic rifle. First of all, it was not easy to make a lathe. Since they were going to imitate it, they might as well imitate the Type 95 automatic rifle. Therefore, the Type 81 automatic rifle quickly left the stage and was mostly stored in Yang Chendong's warehouse. After the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard Division were all equipped with their Type 95 submachine guns, their firing range was around 400 meters. An effective range of 300 meters was not a problem. This time, the division headquarters had requested for the enemy to be 200 meters away, which undoubtedly increased their accuracy. This allowed Lu Wu to completely grasp the rhythm of the battle. When Xiao Yining arrived with the division headquarters, the soldiers of the other regiments had already repelled the Baiming army's first attack. Under the hail of bullets, more than 1,000 Baiming soldiers were thrown to the ground. The Cold Front soldiers very well carried out the orders of the division headquarters. They tried their best to injure the enemy instead of killing them. As a result, they killed fewer people and injured more people, which affected the morale of the soldiers even more. At this time, the thousands of northern Ming soldiers who were wailing at the foot of the city walls were an example. With the existence of these wounded soldiers, the other northern Ming soldiers turned pale with fright. They didn't know if they would end up like this the next time they charged. There were also some lucky Baiming soldiers who were rescued by their comrades and brought back to the barracks. However, they were still injured. Their cries of pain were heard by the other Baiming army soldiers at such a close distance. Because of this, the morale of the soldiers plummeted. Many of them showed fear in their eyes. Some were even tired of fighting. In contrast, the morale of the soldiers of the 5th Division was high. In the previous wave of attacks, not a single Baiming army soldier was able to get within 150 meters of them. This meant that their firearms did not pose any threat at all. Other than wasting some bullets, the entire 5th Division did not have a single injured soldier. The morale of the soldiers was getting higher and higher. Why is the division commander here? When Dang Liming saw Xiao Yining standing beside him, a confused expression appeared on his face. All right, I'm here to train the division's marksmanship. I won't steal your credit. Seeing Dang Liming's intention, Xiao Yining shook his head helplessly and asked, How is it? How are the results? Did we suffer any losses? Knowing that Xiao Yining was not here to steal his credit, Dang Liming's expression immediately brightened. He patted his chest and promised, Don't worry, the Baiming army will not be able to get close to us. Furthermore, we have the battlements to defend ourselves. They are standing on open ground. This is just a target practice. The soldiers will not be in any danger. Xiao Yining's face lit up. Every cold vanguard soldier was carefully selected from the Han people. Most of them were originally from Crimson Castle and Ryukyu Island. If there were any casualties, he would not be able to explain it to their families. Although it was inevitable that there would be casualties in war, Xiao Yining still hoped that there would be fewer deaths. This way, he would be able to explain it to his family. While the two were talking, the Baiming army's second charge began. Compared to the previous charge of thousands of soldiers, this time there were only a few hundred soldiers. It felt more like a probing attack. Damn it, how are we going to fight with so few people? Seeing that there were less than 1,000 soldiers, Dang Liming's face was filled with displeasure. Perhaps he wished that more than 10,000 soldiers from the Baiming firearms camp would charge forward. That way, he could kill to his heart's content. Xiao Yining, who also saw this scene, patted Dang Liming's head. All right, the enemy has their own way of fighting. Immediately pass down the order. The 1st Regiment, 1st Battalion, and the division headquarters are responsible for shooting. Everyone else, stop. Since the number of enemies was small, it would be too wasteful if they fired all at once. It was better to fire one battalion at a time. That way, they could make a comparison and even have a competition on the battlefield to increase everyone's enthusiasm. Naturally, the division headquarters was included. This meant that they were mixing in personal goods. The other regimental commanders could not refuse. If they refused and angered Xiao Yining, he might not even give them a chance to kill the enemy. That would be unbearable. The competition between the battalions began. No matter how many soldiers from the Baiming army came, the distance of 200 to 150 meters was their life and death line. No one could rush over, let alone launch a counterattack. Not only that, after a few short charges, more and more soldiers from the Baiming army could run back without being injured. So much so that the wounded soldiers of the Baiming army were thrown under the city gate tower. When everyone screamed in pain, the other Baiming army soldiers did not dare to come forward. They were afraid that they would be one of them. The firearms camp did not play its role as expected. Instead, they were beaten into idiots. They did not even have the ability to fight back. This made Gao Yu, who was the army supervisor, very angry. However, what made him even more dissatisfied was that as the two cavalry armies under the new army continued to penetrate and cut through, he actually lost another 10,000 or so infantrymen at daybreak the next day. Moreover, most of them were injured soldiers. The number of people who truly died in battle was few and far between. It was precisely because there were too many injured soldiers in the barracks. It was more than a third of the total number of soldiers. The wails and screams of pain were endless. It was like purgatory on earth. It made people's faces change greatly. The morale of the soldiers was greatly shaken. At this moment, if there were no reinforcements, the more than 100,000 Baiming army would collapse. Reinforcements? Where are the reinforcements? Looking back, Gao Yu's eyes flashed. At this moment, he finally knew the power of the 5-star army. he also began to regret that he took the initiative to go out of the city to fight. If he stayed in Talis City, would it be much safer? Talis City. When the 80,000 reinforcements left the city, the commander of the new Second Army led the 1st Cavalry Division and the 2nd Cavalry Division to camp in the city. The military tents were connected to one another, and countless cavalrymen were constantly wandering around. This momentum frightened the northern Ming soldiers who were guarding the city. They also began to realize that the soldiers who had left the city were in danger. Knowing that the Baiming army outside the city may be very dangerous, whether to kill them or not became the problem that the Baiming general Zhang Ping needed to consider. He had climbed up the city tower and roughly looked at the 5-star army cavalry below the city. There were only 10,000 people. If it was only a comparison of forces, they still had a certain advantage. However, war could not be calculated like this. It had to be considered from many aspects. For example, the other side was all cavalry. They could participate in the battle. However, a part of them needed to stay in the city to defend the city. They could not all go to the battlefield. This made the gap between the two sides shrink a lot. Chapter 1330. The 5-star army was all cavalry, and they were infantry, which was a natural disadvantage. Outside of Talis City was a vast grassland. This kind of terrain was suitable for cavalry to spread out and attack. In contrast, infantry were at a disadvantage and lost for a while. Under all kinds of reasons, Zhang Peng came to a conclusion. If they went out of the city, there was a high chance that they would be defeated. If they didn't do well, they might even lose Talis City. Zhang Peng, who was shocked by this conclusion, was even less likely to send reinforcements out of the city. He just sent out several carrier pigeons to inform Gao Yu, who was at the beginning of the city, of his difficulties and predicament. At the same time, he also sent people to the Wan Quan department in the rear. He wanted to report this matter to Admiral Shi Heng. It would be best if Shi Heng could stand up and lead the overall situation. That way, no matter what he did, his responsibility would become very small. Everyone had selfish motives. Knowing that it was very dangerous to go out of the city, Zhang Peng, who wanted to shirk his responsibility, thought of asking Shi Heng to come out. After sending out several carrier pigeons, he waited for news in the city. After a sleepless night, the next day at dawn, he didn't receive any news from his superior. A chilly arch guarding the city ran in front of him. General, quickly go and take a look. A lot of our defeated soldiers have come to the city. They are now being surrounded by the 5-star army cavalry. Well, let's go. Hearing the change in the situation, Zhang Peng was shocked. He quickly went out of the mansion and went straight to the city tower. Running all the way to the top of the city tower, Zhang Peng looked up and saw a lot of soldiers wearing Baiming army uniforms being cut up by the 5-star army cavalry. They were surrounded and attacked with bows and arrows and sabers. In less than a quarter of an hour, at least several hundred Baiming army soldiers were injured on the ground, wailing and screaming. General, the same colonel shouted. There are nearly 1,000 of them, and they're asking if we should open the gates or not. Are we going to open them or not? Yang Qi asked. General, there's a group of about 1,000 of them, and they're calling out to us. Zhang Peng stood behind the battlements and looked down. Sure enough, he saw a large group of people wearing Baiming army uniforms arrive at the city gate. In comparison, their team still had some fighting power. At the very least, they were able to form a defensive formation. With their spears in front of them, they blocked the 5-star army's cavalry from approaching. Even so, from time to time, 1 or 2 soldiers would be injured and fall to the ground. Fortunately, the young general in command of this army had some ability. Once there was a problem, he could always let someone else fill the position. The order of the army was still maintained. However, everyone knew that they wouldn't be able to hold on for long if this continued. Therefore, the young general kept raising his head and cursing. We're all comrades. Hurry up and open the city gates. Do you want to see so many of us die here? Hearing these angry curses, the Baiming army guarding the city naturally didn't dare to do anything in private. However, most people still focused their gazes on Zhang Peng, waiting for this general to make a decision. At this moment, Zhang Peng's face was extremely conflicted. When Gao Yu left, she handed Talu City to him. That was a kind of trust, but also a kind of responsibility. Logically speaking, his main task was to defend the city and prevent it from being occupied by the five-star army. Once the city gates were opened, there would definitely be a certain amount of danger. However, looking at the other soldiers, if he really didn't save them, it would definitely chill the morale of the army. It would also be a heavy blow to his authority as a commander. If he didn't handle it well, the morale of the army would be in chaos. At that time, when he gave a military order, how many people would obey? General, please make a decision. At this moment, several Kiliarchs gathered around Zhang Peng. Their faces looked like they were willing to make a decision. They were all soldiers. Anyone could encounter danger. If they didn't save them now, then when they were in trouble one day, wouldn't others treat them the same way? In the long run, several young generals certainly hoped that Zhang Peng would help. This was not only saving others, but also saving themselves. Originally, Zhang Peng was very hesitant. Now that several Kiliarchs were pressuring him, the balance in his heart began to tilt. He asked in a deep voice, "If the city gates are opened, will the five-star army's cavalry charge into the city?" This meant that Zhang Peng was going to compromise. After hearing this, the other young generals' faces flashed with joy. A quick-witted Chiliarch quickly replied, "They shouldn't. We can use bows and arrows to attack. When the time comes, as long as the city gates are opened fast enough, the five-star army won't be able to charge into the city." That's right, General. Look, the five-star army's cavalry doesn't seem to be paying attention to us. They probably don't think that we will open the city gates. There aren't many cavalry here, so our safety shouldn't be a problem. Another Chiliarch pointed below the city and explained to Zhang Peng. The other Kiliarchs also quickly explained the problem from various angles. All of them expressed the same meaning. That was, as long as they moved fast enough and were prepared, the five-star army wouldn't be able to enter the city. They wouldn't be able to take any advantage. Seeing that everyone was so confident, Zhang Peng took a deep breath and said, "Okay, this general believes you. Since that's the case, prepare enough bows and arrows. We will open the city gates in a while, but we must be fast. We can't let the enemy cavalry enter the city." Yes. Zhang Peng finally made a decision. The other Kiliarchs were also very happy. At this moment, they all cupped their fists and agreed. After all, their superior was benevolent. Just this point alone wasn't a bad thing for everyone. With this order, many archers appeared on the city walls of Tulu City. The city gates were also opened from the inside. Over 100 northern Ming soldiers took this opportunity to rush out of the city gates. They shouted to the 1,000 or so comrades who were standing behind them, Quickly retreat. We have archers to cover you." "Many thanks." The Chiliarch, who had been cursing non-stop, had a look of excitement on his face. He immediately ordered his soldiers to retreat into the open city gates. Behind them, the five-star army's cavalry that wanted to approach were forced back by the thousands of arrows from the city walls. It was like a net of arrows, making it impossible for anyone to enter. It's done. Zhang Peng, who was nervously staring at the city walls, couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the 1,000 or so soldiers from the Baiming army being rescued. No matter what, saving 1,000 people could be considered a meritorious service. At the same time, he would be able to find out what had happened outside from these people. He would be able to find out why the five-star army's cavalry had appeared and why the Baiming army had been defeated. Before Zhang Peng could finish his sigh of relief and before he could ask the retreating soldiers what happened outside, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. The five-star army's cavalry that was still far away suddenly gave up on surrounding the Baiming soldiers. Instead, they angrily rushed towards the city gates that were slowly closing. Are they crazy? Isn't it too late to come now? On top of the city walls, when they saw the five-star army's cavalry rushing towards them, the Baiming army's Kiliarchs on top of the city walls laughed. They laughed at the stupidity of the five-star army. But soon, a piece of news hit their faces like a slap, causing their complexion to instantly change. Not good, the Baiming army that we rescued suddenly betrayed us. They injured our soldiers who were guarding the city gates. They occupied the place and guarded the gate. We can't get close for a while. What? Several Kiliarchs were surprised. They were all confused. They didn't understand why their own people would hurt their own people. They just saved these people. On the other hand, Jean Pring suddenly thought of something after being shocked for a short while. He shouted loudly, "I'm afraid that those people aren't our comrades at all. They are the 5-star army in disguise. Damn it, we've been tricked. Quick, send troops down and take back the city gate. Close it. Be quick." At this time, Jean Pring shouted in hindsight. However, how could it be so easy to turn the tables? Under the 5-star army's long preparation, specifically under the new 2nd Army's commander Xi's planning, the moment they opened the city gates, they were doomed to fail. Just last night, there were cavalry scouts who reported that they discovered many defeated Baiming army infantrymen in the direction of Saihan Mountain. They asked for instructions on what to do. She was currently in the large tent when he was woken up. After hearing this news, he knew that the development of the war had already deviated from its original path. According to Yang Chendong's previous analysis, once the war started, the new 2nd Army's 2 cavalry divisions would face the danger of being attacked from 2 sides by the Baiming army. Because of this, she decided to defend this place no matter what. With the cavalry he brought, he still had a certain advantage. However, when he really brought his troops to Tulu City, the Baiming army's reaction was a bit unexpected. The Baiming army inside the city actually didn't make any movements. They just stood on the city gate tower, allowing them to set up formations and set up tents. This was because the Baiming army was scared. When he saw this change, she quickly made the decision to adapt to the changes on the battlefield. Perhaps the previous military plans were done well, but a general who couldn't adapt to changes wasn't a general. He was just a machine. From the possibility of being attacked from 2 sides to the current Baiming army holding back their troops, the new 2nd Army's 2 cavalry divisions were safe. However, she wasn't satisfied with this result. He already began to boldly imagine if he could find an opportunity to capture Tulu City and completely cut off the several 100,000 Baiming army's path of retreat. If he had made this suggestion before, it clearly wouldn't have been appropriate. But now, the cowardly behavior of the 50,000 infantrymen in Tulu City made Shi see hope. It was just that he couldn't immediately find a breakthrough point. The scouts who came to report in the middle of the night opened up a window in Shibi's heart, allowing him to see an opportunity and hope to attack Tulu City. Shibi called over the 1st Cavalry Division's commander Qiao Chao and the 2nd Cavalry Division's commander Li Jun. After a round of discussion, the 3 of them decided to disguise themselves as the Baiming army to trick the enemy into opening the city gates. Chapter 1331. In order to win this battle in one fell swoop, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Qiao Chao, volunteered to take on the task of luring the enemy to open the gate. He personally selected 1,000 Han soldiers and changed into the Baiming army's uniform. Taking advantage of the darkness, they left the camp and mingled with the Baiming army that was retreating in defeat from the direction of Saihan Mountain. It must be said that the Baiming army was indeed made up of new recruits. Normally, they looked rather powerful, but when they encountered a sudden attack, especially when they heard the rumbling of the 5-star army's warhorses, their fighting spirit quickly collapsed. A portion of them didn't even have time to brandish their weapons and arrows before running back. They had escaped from Tulu City. In many people's hearts, they believed that it would be safe to escape back here. After all, with the city walls as a shield, even if it was only psychologically, it could still give people a sense of comfort. In addition, it was nighttime. The addition of Qiao Chao's 1,000 soldiers didn't cause any chaos at all. When daybreak arrived, Qiao Chao led his 1,000 soldiers and intentionally began to approach Tulu City's gates. Under the new 2nd Army's deliberate carelessness, they were the first to arrive in front of the city gates. As expected, they attracted Zhangping's attention. Because of this, the city gates were opened. This was tantamount to giving Qiao Chao an opportunity to display his abilities. Speaking of which, Qiao Chao wasn't an ordinary person. He was an outstanding student from the Yang Family Academy in Crimson City. After graduation, he entered the Ministry of Public Security and completed some bandit suppression missions. Later, Because of his outstanding performance, he was transferred to the army headquarters as a combat staff officer. His performance was also outstanding. This time, there was a problem with the new Second Army. All of the division-level officers needed to be replaced. Qiao Qiao obtained this opportunity. Based on his performance, he was selected to enter the new Second Army and become the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but only Qiao Qiao himself knew that his military contributions were still too little. If it wasn't because the new Second Army had many problems and was only responsible for defending the city and transporting supplies, the position of commander wouldn't have been his. It was precisely because everyone looked down on the new Second Army that he picked up a loophole. Now, the new Second Army had a combat mission, and it was personally given by the 6th young master, the principal. Just based on this, Qiao Qiao decided to perform well. He could not embarrass the principal, and he had to show his best side. He took the initiative to fight, and got the chance to lure the enemy to open the city gate. After careful planning and good performance, the city gates were finally opened. When Qiao Qiao appeared here with a spear in his hand, it gave birth to a feeling that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 men. As long as he was still alive, he would never allow the Baiming army to take back the gate. Soldiers, we must hold on until the cavalry arrives. We can do it. Qiao Qiao shouted loudly to encourage his soldiers, raising their morale. Below the city gate tower, more and more Baiming army were rushing over. General Zhang Peng had issued a death order. No matter what, they had to take back the city gate. For this, they didn't hesitate to pay any price. Zhang Peng was really anxious. Originally, he wanted to save people out of kindness. Of course, he also wanted to make a contribution. But who would have thought that the people he saved were the enemy? This was a serious dereliction of duty. If he couldn't drive these people out, once the city gate was broken, he would be the biggest sinner. Zhang Peng's desperate counterattack suddenly increased the pressure on Qiao Qiao. He and his soldiers had no choice but to start a massacre. They weren't just hurting people, they were killing people. When their military uniforms were dyed red with blood, the corpses of Baiming soldiers were piled up outside the city gate. This kind of ruthlessness finally shocked the Baiming army who were preparing to attack. Although these Baiming army had also been trained, this was their first time on the battlefield. When the flesh and blood scattered all over the ground, the smell of blood assailed their nostrils. Many people vomited because of this. This was different from their usual training. It was also different from the fights between the common people. This was a battle of life and death. Once they rushed forward, they would often fight to the death. No one would not cherish their own life. The only difference was whether it was worth it or not. They only had limited military pay. Just because of the general's order, they had to pay with their own life. After they died, it was difficult to get any pension policy. After they died, their family would not be taken care of. So, why should they be bathed in blood and kill? Where did their hot blood come from? In contrast, Qiao Qiao and his soldiers didn't have these worries. The Yangtze government had a very sound pension policy for the soldiers. If you died in battle, your family would benefit. If you died because of meritorious service, your family would also follow you for a lifetime of glory. There were many benefits to meritorious service. If you died in battle, your family would also benefit a lot. This made everyone have no worries. Using their lives on the battlefield became a matter of course. When Qiao Qiao and his men were covered in blood as if they had walked out of hell, they came to the front of the Baiming army and shouted, "Who else is there?" The Baiming army involuntarily began to retreat. This was a fear that came from the depths of their bones. "Go, go, go! Comrades, get out of the way! Our cavalry is coming!" Just as Qiao Qiao and his soldiers were confronting the Baiming army, behind them, the cavalry brothers of the new Second Army finally broke through the rain of arrows and entered the city gate. When the cavalry arrived, the situation on the battlefield changed dramatically. The cavalry borrowed the momentum of their horses. When they casually swung their sabers, they could carry a force of several hundred jin. Wherever they went, anyone who tried to resist was either cut in half or heavily injured by the charge of the warhorse. This was the advantage cavalry had over infantry. The arrival of the cavalry meant that Tulu City was about to change hands. Run! Seeing that the cavalry had already begun to kill, the Baiming army standing at the front fell in a short time. The rest of the Baiming army scattered like birds and beasts after an unknown person shouted. They immediately fled in all directions. Zhang Peng, who was standing at the back of the army, saw everything clearly. He staggered and almost fainted on the ground. It was the personal guard beside him who supported him and advised, "General, the situation has changed. We should run. The strength of the 5-star Army's cavalry is not something we can resist. Even if we don't open the city gate, they will find a way to open it. Let's go." The words of comfort had some effect. Zhang Peng, who was already out of his wits, kept nodding. "Okay, let's retreat. Let's retreat." Zhang Peng escaped. Taking advantage of the chaos when the cavalry entered the city, he escaped with 10,000 infantry. They ran straight to the capital head behind them. This was also the only northern Ming army that managed to escape from this battle. Following Zhang Peng's escape, Tulu City changed hands without anyone commanding it. She led the cavalry into the city and saw piles of provisions and gold and silver in the large warehouse. These were the provisions Baiming army had prepared for their 400,000-strong army. Now they had benefited the 5-star army. She entered the city under the protection of a group of cavalry and entered Shiheng's courtyard. Then, she sent a telegram to Yang Qindong. In this battle, she once again proved herself. It also proved that the new Second Army was a strong army that could fight. They completed their mission beyond expectations and made the impossible possible. They seized Tulu City and completely cut off the Baiming army's path of retreat. When Yang Qindong received the telegram, he couldn't help but clap. That's right, Shirlio's performance was very good, especially his reaction on the spot. "Come, everyone in the army report to the new Second Army for commendation. Also, inform Shirlu to report all the meritorious officials in this battle." Yang Qindong's mood improved greatly because of this, his expression no longer as cold as before. Speaking of which, Yang Qindong's mood wasn't that good. It was all because of the telegram sent by the heavy cavalry regiment. They were surrounded by Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. They were determined to live and die with the enemy. This telegram clearly stated their situation, but at the same time, it could also be said to be a resolute telegram. How could Yang Qindong agree that a heavy cavalry regiment was about to be wiped out? He immediately replied with a telegram, asking the regiment commander to hold on until reinforcements arrived. At the same time, he reported the situation to the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Regiment, and the division that were looking for Baiming's Liaodong cavalry on the battlefield. He asked them to quickly provide support to the heavy cavalry regiment. After sending these telegrams, the news of Xi's victory came, making the angry Yang Qindong feel much better. Seeing that the new Second Army had made great contributions, Yang Qindong also felt a surge of hot blood in his body. He glanced at Beta Persei beside him and suddenly asked heroically, "Beta Persei, do you dare to fight the Liaodong cavalry with the young master?" Beta Persei was also a hot-blooded youth. After hearing this, his eyes lit up. He instinctively wanted to agree, but his mouth opened and he became hesitant. Of course, he himself wanted to fight Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. This army was also famous. Beta Persei had long wanted to deal with them and let them know that there was always someone better. This was also what any 5-star army soldier wanted to do. But this matter involved Yang Qindong. It was completely different. As for how important Yang Qindong was now, there was no need to say more. It was not an exaggeration to say that if something happened to him now, Yang Xie would definitely be in chaos. Even the 5-star army would fall apart in an instant. In other words, at this time, anyone in Yang Xie could have a problem, but Yang Qindong couldn't. Now they only had 2,000 black cavalry soldiers with them. If they went to fight Baiming's Liaodong cavalry with this small number of people, it would not be killing people, but arrogantly courting death. No. Beta Persei shook his head firmly. Why not? Although Yang Qindong knew the answer would be like this, he was still a little reluctant. Don't you have the guts? Chapter 1332. No. Young master's body is priceless. How can he take risks so easily? Beta Persei said, unmoved. Yang Chendong did not back down because of this, and continued to persevere. How can it be called taking risks? With the protection of the strongest black cavalry in the world, how can it be dangerous? Or are you saying that you have no confidence in the black cavalry? Beta Persei quickly shook his head and said, how can I not have confidence? The black cavalry is the strongest army in the world. No one can compare to them. Haha, if that's the case, then what are you hesitating for? Since they are the strongest, young master, my safety is of course guaranteed, right? All right, gather the black cavalry immediately and set off with the young master to kill the enemy. Yang Chendong misunderstood Beta Persei's intention and laughed loudly before giving out orders. Soon, the first Captain Qiu Vi, the second Captain Dao Shao and the others led the 2,000 black cavalry and appeared in front of Yang Chendong's tent. At this moment, seeing that Yang Chendong was about to leave the tent, Beta Persei was still loudly persuading him, young master, you can't take risks. What do you mean by taking risks? We are going to kill the enemy. Let me tell you, young heir, this young master has already made up his mind. If you are still trying to persuade me, then after this battle, you should return to Crimson City. I think you have grown old and your courage has shrunk. After coldly throwing down these words, Yang Chendong strode out of the large tent. Beta Persei could no longer persuade him after he said such words. He could only follow behind Yang Chendong. He had already decided that no matter what happened, he would stand in front of Yang Chendong. Even if it was dangerous, he would become a meat shield to protect the young master's safety. Yang Chendong, who was outside the tent, indicated that he wanted to enter the battlefield and find trouble with Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. This order naturally caused the 2,000 black cavalry dragon guards to be extremely excited. Although it was a very proud thing to be able to follow Yang Chendong, if there was a chance to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy, no one would refuse. Because that was the battlefield that men should go to. That was the best place to prove themselves and show off. The 2,000 black cavalry under Yang Chendong's encouragement, everyone's morale was high. Then, they brought their equipment and rushed straight to the area where Baiming's Liaodong cavalry might appear. Yang Chendong's trip was not only to kill the enemy, but also to use himself as bait. He believed that even if Fang Dingshan had the ability to endure, once he knew that he was here, he would definitely not be able to endure it and appear. Contact the other armies at any time and inform them of our location. Yang Chendong wasn't a hothead. He naturally knew the importance of safety. He wouldn't just randomly charge around in anger. He had his own plan for every step he took. For example, his appearance would definitely attract the attention of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. Perhaps he would soon solve the problem of the heavy cavalry regiment being surrounded. After all, compared to himself and the heavy cavalry regiment, which target was more important, presumably even a fool would be able to tell. Heavy cavalry regiment. At this time, Windchaser was staring at the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry that surrounded them with blood-red eyes. In the past, he had always wanted to find the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. He wanted to compete with them to prove that he was the strongest. Because of this, after receiving the military order, Windchaser immediately led the 5,000 heavy cavalry regiment into the grassland and entered the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry's area of activity. Their luck was not bad. They quickly found a group of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry that had the same number of people. Or it could be said that the other party had discovered them and took the initiative to appear. Then, a great battle ensued. The heavy cavalry regiment used facts to prove their ability. Using the advantage of heavy armor and the 3-meter-long blades in their hands, they heavily injured the enemy. In one battle, they killed 2,000 of the enemy and injured 1,000 of them. They had basically crippled the 5,000 Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. Then came the pursuit. Windchaser wanted to continue expanding the battle results, but the weakness of the heavy cavalry regiment was exposed. Because their armor and weapons were too heavy, long-distance running was not suitable for them. However, because the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry looked like they were about to run out of energy, they continued to chase. After running for a few dozen li, Windchaser found that the heavy cavalry regiment had expended too much energy. Just as he ordered the army to stop, countless Baiming's Liaodong cavalry appeared from all directions. Looking from afar, there were at least 20,000 of them. At this time, how could Windchaser not know that he had fallen into a trap? However, with their heavy armor, he was not afraid. Instead, he launched 2 counterattacks. However, the general of the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry, Luo Baikuan, was very smart. Once he discovered the heavy cavalry regiment charging over, he continuously retreated. He only used arrows to stop them and did not engage in close combat. After 2 consecutive attacks, the horses of the heavy cavalry regiment were already panting. Some of the horses could no longer bear the weight and fell to the ground. Cavalry soldiers without horses were like infantry soldiers without legs. Windchaser quickly ordered the army to dismount and prepare to meet the enemy. Then, the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry began to charge. Using the advantage of the horses, the enemy charged 3 times and killed over 1,000 soldiers of the heavy cavalry regiment, while the enemy suffered less than 50 casualties. Windchaser, who did not have a horse, finally saw the weakness of his side. He knew that it was all because he wanted to quickly gain merit. He immediately sent the telegram to Yang Chendong and then had the soldiers form a circle with the horses in the center. They were ready to meet the enemy at any time. The Baiming's Liaodong cavalry that surrounded them did not seem to be in a hurry. Other than using arrows, they did not charge. It was clear that they wanted to use up the remaining strength of the heavy cavalry regiment. After all, being surrounded, Windchaser and his soldiers could not get enough rest. In addition, they could not replenish their rations and water. After a long time, it could be said that they would collapse without a fight. Luo Baikuan clearly wanted to obtain victory without shedding a drop of blood. For this reason, they had waited for half a day. Once he found that the heavy cavalry regiment wanted to rest, he would order the cavalry to release their arrows and prepare to charge. After a few rounds, the heavy cavalry regiment was exhausted and the sky slowly darkened. But even after the sky darkened, the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry still continued to attack. During this time, they took the opportunity to launch a cavalry charge and took the lives of another 500 soldiers. They left behind dozens of corpses and left. From dusk to dawn, the eyes of the heavy cavalry regiment soldiers who had endured through the night were blood red, and Windchaser was even more so. He had even thought of charging back more than once. The horses had recovered some strength after a night of rest, but Yang Chendong's telegram clearly told them to defend and wait for reinforcements. They could not charge. In the face of the 6th young master's orders, Windchaser did not dare to disobey. He could only hold on and hope that reinforcements would arrive sooner. But the grasslands were so big that even if the cavalry wanted to rush to the battlefield, it would take a long time. The heavy cavalry regiment was destined to continue waiting. Just like this, the sky darkened again. In the blink of an eye, it was day again. When the sky brightened, Windchaser forced himself to close his eyes to look at the situation of the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. He was shocked to find that the enemies that surrounded them had already retreated. They actually retreated? Windchaser's face was filled with confusion. He personally ordered a few cavalry to get on their horses to scout for information. He was worried that this was another enemy's plan to lower his guard and then counterattack. Not long after the cavalry left, they returned. This meant that there was not a single Baiming Liaodong cavalry within 10 li of them. Although Windchaser did not know the reason, he knew that he was safe. He immediately ordered that other than sending out a few cavalry scouts, everyone else should take the time to rest. In this battle, more than half of the 5,000 heavy cavalry regiment's cavalry had died. They were almost crippled. The morale of the army was greatly affected. Their stamina was also greatly depleted. Right now, they needed a good rest. He slept from dawn to the afternoon until the scouts returned. They said that the new 101st Army commander had brought reinforcements 8 miles away. Windchaser hurriedly got up. Then he organized the troops and prepared to welcome them. At this time, Windchaser believed that the reason why the Baiming Liaodong cavalry retreated was because they knew that the 101st Regiment was coming here. They knew that they were not a match, so they left. Just as he was thinking about how to thank the 101st Regiment commander Lu Jua, a large group of cavalry appeared in his sight. Windchaser led a group of heavy cavalry soldiers to welcome them. When they were still some distance away, he stopped and got off his horse with a grateful expression. At the front of the cavalry was Commander Lu Jua. At this time, he was anxiously galloping until he was less than 10 meters away from Windchaser and the others. Seeing that it was indeed Commander Lu Jua, Windchaser quickly went to welcome him. When he was 3 meters away, he saluted and said with gratitude, "Commander Lu, thank you for coming to save the heavy cavalry regiment." "Thank you." Lu Jua first looked behind Windchaser. When he saw that there were still 2,000 heavy cavalry soldiers, he let out a sigh of relief. Although this battle could be considered a heavy loss, the heavy cavalry regiment's foundation was still there. If they had enough time, they could recover their strength. Since the problem of the heavy cavalry regiment was solved, Lu Jua's expression tensed up again. He looked at Windchaser and said, "You don't need to thank me. I don't have the ability to scare off the Baiming Liaodong cavalry." Wind-chasing Wolf was at a loss when he heard this sentence. Lu Jua knew that if he didn't explain, Windchaser wouldn't know what was going on. He said, "The one who really saved you was the 6th young master. He personally led 2,000 black cavalry soldiers into where the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was. The reason why the Baiming Liaodong cavalry left was to attack the 6th young master." What? Windchaser's eyes suddenly turned blood red. He looked at Lu Jua and said loudly, "Commander Lu, please say it again." Chapter 1333. I said that in order to save you, the 6th young master took the initiative to appear on the battlefield and attracted the attention of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. The cavalry that surrounded you didn't leave because of our arrival. They left because of the 6th young master. Lu Jua's expression didn't look too good, but he also knew that this matter wasn't Windchaser's fault. After all, Yang Chendong took the initiative to do this. Lu Jua shouted happily, but Windchaser's face was already covered in tears. He didn't expect that in order to save him, the 6th young master would take the risk. In this case, he was such a bastard. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and gave himself a big slap. His 5 bright red fingers imprinted on his face. "Okay." Seeing Windchaser hurting himself, Lu Jua shook his head. "Now is not the time for us to blame ourselves. How to save the 6th young master is the most important thing. I still have to lead the 101st Division forward. Since you are safe, go back to the first city and have a good rest." After saying this, Lu Jua was ready to leave. In his eyes, saving Yang Chendong was the most important thing. But if he wanted to leave now, he needed Windchaser's permission. With a plop, Windchaser got off his horse and knelt in front of Lu Jua's horse. "Commander Lu, please allow me to go with you." Lu Jua was shocked by this kneeling. After understanding Windchaser's meaning, he had to shake his head. "Captain Windchaser, I want you to go back and rest. This is what the 6th young master said in the telegram. What you should do now is to obey the military order. Do you understand?" Windchaser shook his head with a painful expression. "The 6th young master came to save me. How can I do nothing? How about this? The rest of the heavy cavalry regiment will go back and rest. I will go with you alone, okay?" At this moment, Windchaser had to follow Lu Jua even if he had to violate military orders. This was the only thing he could do. Lu Jua really wanted to say that it was hard to disobey military orders. However, looking at Zhui Feng's tear-streaked face and red eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say those harsh words. He could only nod his head and say, "All right, then you'll go and follow behind this army commander." Mount Chiyun. Although it was called a mountain, it was actually just a slightly higher hillside. It was located on the grassland and there was nothing around it to block the view. Under the strong wind and sand, most of the trees on the mountain had withered, leaving only 3 to 5 small trees standing there. However, due to the high terrain, there was not enough water, so it was only a matter of time before it dried up. Yang Chendong chose to set up camp here for the 2,000 black cavalry soldiers. Firstly, the terrain here was high, so they didn't have to worry about the Baiming Liaodong cavalry scouts not being able to see them. Secondly, the terrain here was open, so it was more suitable for the cavalry to appear in a large area. Thirdly, from the high ground, it could be used as an unstoppable force. Guarding this place, they only needed to prepare enough water and food. Although it couldn't be said that one man could hold the pass against 10,000, it was still better than being surrounded by enemies on all sides. Yang Chendong was not disappointed even though he intended to be discovered by others. Soon, the scouts of the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry appeared in the surroundings. They were constantly running back and forth as if they wanted to confirm the true identity of this group. Yang Chendong, who wanted to attract attention and save the heavy cavalry regiment, wore a golden battle robe and rode out on a white dragon. He roared at the sky and shouted in a very imposing manner, "This king is Bugnam of Gojoseon, Yang Chendong. You little rascals dare to spy here, why aren't you quickly retreating?" Just this shout alone was full of energy and could be said to be earth-shattering. Under the shout, there were indeed many scouts who quickly dispersed. Those who stayed behind also maintained a sufficient distance from them. It really was as if one sentence could shake 10,000 soldiers. After shouting away those annoying scouts, he could also use them to inform their masters. Yang Chendong believed that it wouldn't be long before there would be enemies everywhere. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. He turned to the black cavalry and said, "Chop down all the surrounding wood and stack it together to form a defensive position. Quickly do it." The Black Knight Dragon Guards, who had always regarded Yang Chendong as their leader and worshipped him as a god, immediately agreed and began to get busy. As their leader, Beta Persei naturally didn't have to do any work. He came to Yang Chendong's side and asked in a low voice, "Young master, should we send a telegram now and let the other cavalry troops gather here?" "No hurry, this will only alert the enemy. Let's wait a little longer. By the way, let the soldiers separate some of them to check the guns. They haven't been used for a while. Don't let anything happen." Yang Chendong waved his hand casually. He dared to appear here with 2,000 black cavalry because he relied on firearms. This was the strength of the black cavalry. They combined all the advantages of the cold front and cavalry. They had the ability to charge quickly and also the ability to suppress the enemy with firearms. Otherwise, even if he was confident, he wouldn't dare to take only 2,000 men to challenge the 100,000 Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry. Beta Persei happily agreed and turned to do it. He was really worried that the young master would immediately dispatch other troops, so there would be someone to steal their credit. Now, 2,000 against 100,000. Even if they couldn't get half of them, it was enough to kill to their heart's content. Only a thick-skinned person like Beta Persei would think this way. Perhaps in his eyes, Yang Chendong's existence was an invincible legend. As for the scouts of Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry, they left excitedly after seeing Yang Chendong appear in Chiyun Mountain and reported to Fang Dingshan, who was hiding in a mountain forest 80 miles away. Fang Dingshan was very cunning. He didn't stay with Gao Yu's hundreds of thousands of soldiers because he was afraid that he would be implicated by the other party. He was just an army supervisor who had never fought in a war. It didn't seem credible to say that he could defeat the 5-star army in one battle. However, Fang Dingshan didn't have the intention to dissuade Gao Yu. He didn't even look suspicious. He had his own calculations, or rather, he needed someone to attract the attention of the 5-star army. This would make it easier for him to do things. Things developed as he expected. The scouts reported that Gao Yu's situation wasn't very good. After the siege was blocked, the cannons were blown up. It was said that the 5-star army had surrounded them. It seemed that things weren't looking good for them. Fang Dingshan, who rejoiced at his foresight, immediately locked onto the 5-star army's heavy cavalry regiment and waited for the news of victory. Fang Dingshan was still very capable. At least, he had done a lot of work to understand the 5-star army. For example, the heavy cavalry regiment was one of the targets he carefully understood. Then he found the weakness of the other party. It was because their equipment was heavy and they couldn't fight for a long time. After finding the weakness, he only needed to counteract it. This was how the heavy cavalry regiment was surrounded. Next, he just needed to wait for the good news. While waiting, a young scout with an excited face half knelt in front of him. "General, great news, great news. Has the heavy cavalry regiment already been devoured by us?" Fang Dingshan asked calmly. However, he wasn't that excited. Although it was a merit to take down a heavy cavalry regiment, the other party only had 5,000 cavalrymen after all. For him who had 100,000 cavalrymen, it wasn't a big deal. The scout's face was still red because of his excitement. General, we found Bugnam of Gojoseon. When he heard that they didn't destroy the heavy cavalry regiment, Fang Dingshan's face still had a trace of unhappiness. However, after that, he suddenly stood up with his eyes wide open. He asked as if he didn't hear clearly, "Wait, what did you just say? Who did you find?" "General, we found Bugnam of Gojoseon. He only brought 2,000 black cavalry soldiers to Chiyun Mountain." The scout's voice rose an octave. They found Yang Chendong with only 2,000 cavalry soldiers. This news was like a bolt of lightning that shocked Fang Dingshan. He was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth. As for whether it was the black cavalry or not, he didn't care. After all, there were only 2,000 people. How could they be a match for his elite Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry? Excitement, excitement. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the biggest threat to Baiming wasn't the Southern Ming dynasty, nor was it Yang Xie or the Five-Star Army. It was Yang Chendong. As long as he got rid of this person, it was equivalent to getting rid of the biggest worry in his heart. This way, the emperor could sit back and do what he wanted to do without any worries. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that whoever could kill Yang Chendong would definitely be a great contributor to Baiming. It would also be a great contributor to the Southern Ming dynasty. In short, it would be a blessing for the great Ming dynasty. For this, it would be worth it even if they had to pay a huge price. Fang Dingshan was also tempted by such a great contribution. However, after seeing the strength of the Five-Star Army, he had no choice but to suppress this thought. He never thought that an opportunity would appear like this. Yang Chendong would appear in his field of vision with only 2,000 cavalry soldiers. Could it be that the heavens wanted him to die and wanted to give him a great contribution? The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. After a long while, Fang Dingshan finally calmed down. When he looked at the scout, his eyes were full of excitement. "Did you find out if there are any other Five-Star Army soldiers moving around?" Fang Dingshan couldn't be blamed for asking this. Yang Chendong's sudden appearance with so few guards around him, he couldn't help but wonder if this was a trap. "No, this general has already sent out all the scouts. There are no traces of the Five-Star Army within 100 li radius. I have already arranged for them to continue expanding the search area." How could the scout not understand this logic? If he couldn't even figure out this problem, he wouldn't be worthy of being a scout. Enough. After hearing that there were no Five-Star Army movements within 100 li radius, Fang Dingshan nodded his head in satisfaction. So what if Bailey Wudi was really a trap? As long as he was given 4 hours, he could use his army to eliminate these 2,000 cavalry soldiers. This way, once Yang Chendong died, the so-called encirclement would be meaningless. That, did you see clearly? Was that Bugnam of Gojoseon? Chapter 1334. Fang Dingshan was worried that the one being surrounded was not Bugnam of Gojoseon. If that was the case, not only would it be a joke, but it would also put the entire army in danger. "Yes." The scout replied with a firm tone. "This general has personally seen Bugnam of Gojoseon. I will definitely not be mistaken." Hearing such a firm reply, Fang Dingshan laughed heartily. He then patted the scout's shoulder with his right hand and said with satisfaction, "You did well. This time, killing Bugnam of Gojoseon will be a great achievement. Now send out all the scouts. Once you discover any reinforcements from the Five-Star Army, report to me immediately." After receiving Fang Dingshan's encouragement and praise, the scout left with a face full of excitement. At this time, Fang Dingshan had already made up his mind. He wanted to surround Yang Chendong and kill him. He wanted to kill Bugnam of Gojoseon and achieve a great achievement. When the emperor heard this news, he would definitely be very happy. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to be conferred a duke. "Men, this general wants to immediately summon all the generals at home." On Chiyun Mountain. The black cavalry had already cut down many huge trees and placed them together to form a solid defensive wall. It was not like a trench where the trees were placed together to form a house. The large gaps were blocked with huge logs, leaving only a few small gaps for the muzzles to be placed. This way, it would not delay the shooting of the enemy and could also effectively block most of the arrows fired by the enemy. Buckets of clean water were also placed in the wooden huts. There were also prepared dried bacon, 5 meats, ham sausages, instant noodles, and some dry rations. Boxes of shiny yellow bullets were stacked together. There was even a large-scale toilet that had just been built not far away. Yang Chundong was clearly prepared for a long battle. What bullshit Baiming Liaodong cavalry? What Baiming elites? Yang Chundong was going to fight the elites. He wanted to use this battle to let the enemy know the difference between the two sides. From now on, they would be honest and would not cause trouble for him. Therefore, even though the Black Knight Dragon Guard had already seen through the binoculars that many northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry were gathering nearby and were slowly encircling this place, he had no intention of sending a telegram for help. He wanted to first weaken the enemy's morale. For this battle, Yang Chundong took out a lot of light and heavy machine guns and ammunition from the warehouse. He wanted to give the Baiming Liaodong cavalry a head-on blow. If the reinforcements appeared too early, Fang Dingshan would not have to pay such a huge price. Long Wei, get ready. If you feel that you can't hold on, this king will send a telegram to the 1st Cavalry Division, he said in a provocative tone. After these words, some of the black cavalry soldiers' faces turned red. The deputy commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ba Daojiang, was a straightforward person. He was also deeply trusted by Yang Chundong, so he did not have to worry too much about what he said. Therefore, he was the first to object. 6th young master, please go ahead. We don't need any reinforcements. We can still beat up these Baiming Liaodong cavalry until they cry for their parents. With Ba Daojiang taking the lead, the others soon followed and shouted, yes, we don't need reinforcements. We are the most powerful. How good. Then this king will sit and watch your performance. This was exactly the result that Yang Chundong wanted. He chuckled and sat on a wooden chair that Beta Persei and the others had just made. He drank the brewed tea, crossed his legs, and leisurely closed his eyes while singing an unknown song. Yang Chundong was very optimistic about this battle since he was prepared to use firearms against cold weapons. The existence of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was like a thorn in the Yangtze, becoming the biggest threat to Shi City. If he did not remove this thorn, he was afraid that he would be infected at any time and hurt his whole body. Yang Chundong would never allow such a thing to happen. In order to completely solve this problem, he used a lot of firearms this time and even took the initiative to test it out. Even if he had no choice but to take the lives of some Han warriors, he had to do it. Fortunately, according to the intelligence department's understanding, the core component of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was not the Han people, but the Manchu and some Mongolian people. This made him not show any mercy when he attacked. As for whether it was dangerous for him to stand here, Yang Chundong had never thought about it. It was impossible to say that there was no danger at all. Even if there was a war, there would be deaths and injuries. However, it was unrealistic to say that it was very dangerous. After all, he had too many abilities to protect himself. Even if these 2,000 black cavalry could not hold on, he was not afraid. He had plenty of methods to deal with his opponent. Right now, it was just a matter of whether the other party had the ability to force him. At this moment, Yang Chundong, who had his eyes closed, thought of the big warehouse. He thought of the neat rows of war chariots, tanks, and even helicopters inside. This was his true trump card. Just based on this, even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he would not be able to enter. With the protection of the big warehouse, Yang Chundong had such confidence. Although he did not know what caused this, with such ability he had to do something. The world was one, and the Han people were supreme. This became Yang Chundong's goal. Although it seemed that this goal was too grand and difficult to achieve, it was still a dream. However, Yang Chundong firmly believed that as long as he did it step by step, there would be a possibility of success. If he only thought about it every day and did nothing, not to mention that his life was just a short few decades, even if he was given thousands of years, so what? Thinking about this, Yang Chendong slowly fell asleep. There was a peaceful smile on his face, as if he had seen something in his dream that made him happy. Young master, the enemy is about to attack. Seeing Yang Chendong sleeping so soundly, Beta Persei did not want to disturb him. However, after considering that the battle would start soon and the sound of gunfire would not be small, if he did not wake up the young master, it would be a big crime if he really scared him. Oh, is it coming? Slowly opening his eyes, Yang Chendong first rubbed his eyelids, then slowly got up. Finding that the Liaodong cavalry would not attack him, Yang Chendong did not have any doubts about this matter. With such a piece of fat meat in front of him, there was no reason not to eat it. Although it was not appropriate to compare himself to a piece of fat meat, Yang Chendong knew very well that this was the case. After getting up, Yang Chendong took the binoculars from Beta Persei's hands and looked around. Sure enough, Chiyun Mountain was surrounded by Baiming Liaodong cavalry. They were wearing the Great Ming Dynasty's Mandarin duck military uniform. Each of them held a saber in their hands and led their horses. They looked like they were ready to charge at any time. Quite a lot of them came. There was no trace of fear on his face. On the contrary, Yang Chendong seemed to smile with satisfaction. Then he strode towards the high platform in the tent that was built by Beta Persei and the others before, so that they could stand higher and see further to observe the enemy. Now Yang Chendong walked up to the platform. Then he stood at the highest point of Chiyun Mountain in his golden battle robe. The appearance of the golden color instantly attracted everyone's attention. Young master, be careful. Seeing Yang Chendong walk to the highest point before the start of the battle, Beta Persei, who was afraid of danger, hurriedly shouted. Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, Ba Dao Jiang, Peng Yu, and the others behind him were also worried. It's okay. Yang Chendong casually waved his hand, telling Beta Persei and the others not to be excited. Then he said to Telecommunications Director Wang Shan, "Bring me the loudspeaker." Wang Shan, who had been promoted to director, hurriedly handed over the iron loudspeaker that he had prepared long ago. Although this thing was a little rough, it could still play a certain role in amplifying the sound. He slowly raised the loudspeaker with his right hand and placed it near his mouth. Yang Chendong's voice also spread far and wide. Brothers of the Baiming army, I am Yang Chendong, Bugnam of Gojoseon, a king personally conferred by the emperor. But I don't know why you are here. Are you here on the emperor's orders? If not, isn't this no different from a rebellion? If that's the case, you'd better retreat quickly. This king is merciful and can forget all about your appearance here. But if you still don't obey, then don't blame this king for being ruthless. Later, the army will surround you. When that time comes, you won't have a chance to escape. You can decide for yourselves where to go. After shouting loudly, Yang Chendong put away the loudspeaker and returned to the wooden base from the high ground. Seeing that he was safe and sound, Beta Persei first breathed a sigh of relief, but then said with a bitter face, "Young master, I'm afraid it's useless to say this now." Looking at Beta Persei's expression, how could Yang Chendong not know that this person was simply afraid that his words would scare away the Baiming Liaodong cavalry? But he didn't point it out and nodded in agreement. Of course it's useless, and I don't expect it to be useful. I said this to tell Fang Dingshan that this king is here, so that he can attack without worry. With this explanation, everyone was suddenly enlightened. Although Yang Chendong had shown himself before, only a few scouts had seen him. Even if it was reported to Fang Dingshan, he would only believe 70% of it. Only after witnessing it with his own eyes would he feel relieved. Otherwise, if the attack didn't go well, and he doubted whether Yang Chendong was really here, what would happen if he retreated? After Yang Chendong's appearance, things were different. After confirming the authenticity of Yang Chendong's appearance, Fang Dingshan would definitely not withdraw his troops unless there was really no hope left for him to make a great contribution. This was the reason why Yang Chendong had to show himself before the battle. This was tantamount to giving Fang Dingshan a reassurance. This king is right here, come if you have the ability. After knowing Yang Chendong's intentions, Yang Heir and the others laughed mischievously. With sufficient preparation, they were most worried that the enemy would run away. If that was the case, then wouldn't they have no place to display their skills? Now, they were even more confident. Each of them laughed heartily and waited for the enemy to charge in and kill them. Chapter 1335. As the Black Cavalry, they were awe-inspiring. However, as the Yang faction continued to grow, they gradually began to feel like heroes had no place to display their talents. Like today, there were not many opportunities to lead the enemy to encircle them. Everyone wanted to perform well, not to mention that they were so well prepared. Look, each person had a Type 95 gun, a squad had 2 light machine guns, a heavy machine gun, a platoon had a 100mm mortar, and countless ammunition. With such weapons, how could they face any enemy? Not to mention 100,000, even if there were 200,000 or 500,000, what could they do? At this time, the 2,000 Black Cavalry were all eager to fight. They had already taken off their black armor and were waiting for the enemy to attack. The war was about to begin. After Beta Persei got Yang Chendong's approval, he began to assign tasks. Considering that there were 3 slopes on Chiyun Mountain, 1 steep slope, and the area was not very large, Beta Persei divided the Black Cavalry into 2 groups. They were the first and second groups. He requested that when the battle started, the groups would fight one by one, with a limit of 2 hours, and they would take turns to rest. And each group would take out 200 people, a total of 400 people as an emergency team. In case of an accident, there would be soldiers available. Even if they had the best weapons, the number of troops was also very important. Otherwise, if 2,000 people were to shoot randomly, even if they had good weapons, what could they do? In the end, people were still needed in a war. The Black Cavalry of Chiyun Mountain were making all kinds of preparations. General Fang Dingshan at the foot of the mountain was also flushed. If he had only heard about it before, then he had seen it with his own eyes. The person who shouted was Bugnam of Gojoseon, especially that voice. When he was an imperial bodyguard, he had seen Yang Chendong more than once and heard his voice. Even if it was confirmed that the person who was surrounded was Bugnam of Gojoseon and did not run away, Fang Dingshan firmly believed that his chance to make a great contribution had come. It was only 2,000 cavalrymen. Even if they could fight, how could they be a match for his army of 100,000? Even if it was a battle of attrition, he would exhaust these people to death. Not to mention, the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's reputation as elites was not undeserved. Their combat strength was very strong, and they believed that there was no target that they could not take down. Pass down the order. Let's use 1,000 cavalry as a unit and charge. Other than the steep side, attack the other 3 sides with all your might. Don't be afraid of sacrificing yourself. Try to take down Mount Chiyun in one go. If you can't do it, attack them one by one. I will exhaust them to death, Fang Dingshan shouted excitedly. He had no intention of underestimating the 2,000 Black Cavalry soldiers. He had also made many preparations so that he could react at any time. Considering the terrain of Mount Chiyun, sending too many people up would not be of much use. He decided to send 3,000 men to observe the situation first. If there was a chance, the whole army would attack. If it did not work, then he would look for a change. Fang Dingshan was clearly a qualified general. He was not arrogant at all. On the contrary, even when he attacked, he was very careful. When he came up, he would try to probe the enemy. He could be considered an excellent general. With a command, 3,000 Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry from 3 directions moved out. Under the beating of the war drums, they spurred their horses forward. 3,000 cavalrymen came from afar in a fan-shaped formation. The cavalrymen were constantly making all kinds of evasive maneuvers. Sometimes they were on top of their horses, sometimes they were below their horses, and sometimes they were close to their horses. Their superb horsemanship was displayed incisively and vividly. They're finally here. On Mount Chiyun, Beta Persei rubbed his hands excitedly. His eyes never left the battlefield for a moment. When he saw that the distance between the 2 sides was less than 800 meters, he stretched out his hands and placed them on the butt of a heavy machine gun. Soldiers of the 1st Brigade, pay attention. Don't be impulsive. Wait until the enemy is 300 meters away. This time, we won't let them go back. 300 meters was only 10 breaths of time for the charging cavalry. It was dangerous to launch a counterattack at this time. However, after seeing the excellent weapons of the Black Knights and Dragon Guards, everyone felt that it was only right and proper. Moreover, everyone was full of confidence. On the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's side, Fang Dingshan walked out of the main tent and looked over. He also wanted to see how Yang Chendong was going to get out of the encirclement. Just now, the scout had reported that there were no reinforcements from the 5-star army within 100 miles. In other words, the 2,000 black cavalry were still alone. This made Fang Dingshan overjoyed. With this, he was even more confident that he could kill Bugnam of Gojoseon here. His gaze followed the cavalry's charge. When he saw that they were less than a mile away from the 5-star army's camp, Fang Dingshan was so nervous that his throat almost jumped out of his throat. At this moment he was full of confidence. He believed that at such a distance, the cavalry was the absolute ruler of the battlefield. The black cavalry had no room to struggle. He was even prepared to order the entire army to charge. Although he only brought 40,000 Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry because of time constraints, he was confident that it would not be a problem to take care of 2,000 enemy cavalry. 500 meters, 400 meters, 350 meters. At this distance, those with good eyesight could even see the faces of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. They could also see that they were holding onto their bows and ready to shoot at any time. Some of the black cavalry also reflexively began to sweat. Attack! Just when some of the black cavalry were so nervous that they could not help but fire, the temporary commander, Beta Persei, shouted. Then, the heavy machine gun in his hand was the first to fire. Bullets swept forward like beans. The 5 Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry in this area were like grass that was crushed by a boulder. They instantly fell to the ground together with their horses. Attack! The captain of the 1st Brigade, Chiu Vi, and the vice-captain, Badeo Jiang, shouted at the same time. Then, the light and light guns and the Type 95 continuous fire and burst fire sounded together. The battlefield was instantly surrounded by all kinds of bullets. One by one, the hot bullet shells kept jumping on the ground. Following that, one by one, the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry fell to the ground. As the ancients said, shoot the horse before shooting the man. But in the eyes of the black cavalry, who had good marksmanship, they preferred to shoot people. It gave them a greater sense of achievement. This also showed the strength of the black cavalry. They had all undergone high-intensity shooting training. Who knew how many bullets they were fed, but their marksmanship was not bad. This time, they finally had a chance to show off. Bullets rained down. One after another, the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry fell on the path of the charge. It was a pity that their exquisite horsemanship and impressive martial arts did not even have a chance to display them at this moment. Bullets flew everywhere. In just a quarter of an hour, the 3,000 black cavalry were completely annihilated. Fang Dingshan did not give the order to retreat. Not a single one of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry retreated. It could be seen that their military discipline was very strict. Hiss! Fang Dingshan in the middle of the army felt a pain in his teeth. These were 3,000 black cavalry. Just like that, they died on the charge. Not a single one of them even had the chance to swing their weapons. This loss made him feel a toothache, a headache, and pain all over his body. General, what do we do? They actually have firearms. UG General Mu Qiong also had a pained expression as he asked Fang Dingshan. The black cavalry actually had firearms. This was indeed out of Fang Dingshan's expectations. However, it was absolutely impossible for them to retreat just like that. It was not easy to get a chance to surround Yang Chendong. He would not give it up so easily. Facing his subordinate's question, Fang Dingshan pretended to be indifferent and said, "Isn't it just firearms? We Baiming Iron Cavalry have them too. We've seen them before. No matter how powerful they are, they still need to use gunpowder. After all, they only have 200 men. I want to see what they will do once they run out of gunpowder." Come, let's order 3,000 more. 6,000 black cavalry, charge. Fang Dingshan did not believe in heresy. After giving this order, he turned to a scout and said, "Immediately send a message to General Luo Baikuan. Tell him to come over here. This time, even if we have to use numbers, we must keep Bugnam of Gojoseon here." Just like that, Yang Chendong's first goal was achieved. That was to rescue the heavy cavalry windchaser unit that was surrounded. With himself as the target, he successfully attracted over 100,000 Baiming Liaodong iron cavalry to rush over. On Chiyun Mountain, after the first wave of enemies was completely wiped out, there was a burst of cheers from above. Every soldier of the Black Cavalry's 1st Battalion was filled with excitement and excitement. Just now, they had fought to their heart's content. Only now did they know that compared to fighting on horseback, killing with guns was much more satisfying and clean. The 1st Battalion had a good time, while the 2nd Battalion's members were filled with envy and jealousy. The 2nd Battalion's commander, Dao Xiao, purposely approached the temporary commander Beta Persei and said, "Second brother, do you think it's our turn now? It's not time yet, but you can discuss it with Captain Chiu. As long as he agrees, I don't mind." Beta Persei was in a good mood and naturally would not reject Dao Xiao's desire to kill the enemy. He looked at the military watch on his wrist and said casually, "But." Dao Xiao immediately nodded in agreement and walked to Chiu V's side. Before he spoke, he smiled and said, "Captain Chiu, Brother Chiu? Don't say anything. A battalion takes an hour. We've only used less than half of that time. You guys wait a little longer." Chiu V was having a good time. How could he agree to a change of guard so easily? This was such a good opportunity. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was a once-in-a-decade opportunity. Moreover, even if he agreed, the brothers below him would most likely not agree. Chapter 1336. After being rejected, Dao Xiao's expression turned ugly. When he returned to his own unit, he looked at the expectant faces of his subordinates. He could only pretend to be indifferent and said, "Don't worry, there are still so many enemies here, and there will be more and more. 100,000 people is enough for us to kill to our heart's content." The morale of the members of the 2nd unit was low, but when they heard their leader's words, they were all in high spirits again. That's right, there were so many enemies. Could it be that they would all be wiped out by the 1st unit? Look, the enemy is charging again. This time, there are even more of them. A scout held a pair of binoculars and reported the situation loudly. "Ha, good, good." Hearing this, not only did no one on the mountain show any signs of fear, but instead, the members of the 1st unit were all excited. On the other hand, Dao Xiao and the others were envious. Some of them were even praying in their hearts, "Don't charge so fiercely. Leave some for us to kill." The 6,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry charged forward bravely and fearlessly, as if the death of the 3,000 Baiming cavalry did not affect them at all. It had to be said that Fang Dingshan was a person who knew the army well, and he was also a general who was strict in military discipline. Of course, this was also inseparable from the environment of the great Ming dynasty. If a martial artist wanted to have a bright future, they could only do so through military merit. Being on the battlefield was the only chance for them to perform. In addition, the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was very clear about rewards and punishments, so the 6,000 Baiming cavalry charged forward fearlessly. "They still don't know the power of our firearms. Come, get ready. When I open fire, don't hold back and kill them all." Beta Persei shouted excitedly. He did not know how long it had been since he had a good battle. He felt all the blood in his body rushing to his head, and he only wanted to continue killing the enemies. Gunshots rang out from the distance of 300 meters, and just like before, the 6,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry fell to the ground amidst the gunshots and cannons. Still, no one could reach the top of Chiyun Mountain. 6,000 people. Although the number was twice as much as before, they were still completely wiped out in less than an hour. After the battle, Beta Persei commanded the 400 Black Cavalry as a reserve force to rush out of the wooden house and onto the battlefield, bringing back some of the ownerless war horses. During this process, They even discovered more than 100 wounded soldiers of the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. When they saw the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards finally approaching, they seemed to have seen new hope. Unfortunately, in front of the 400 reserve members who were already prepared, they didn't even have the chance to jump up and swing their swords before they were killed by the flying bullets. War horses could be bought. These were all healthy horses, and Bei Ming had spent a lot of money to get them. However, he couldn't take these soldiers. There were only 2,000 black cavalry soldiers on the mountain. If there were too many prisoners, it would be hard to avoid unexpected dangers. Yang Chendong was here, so he couldn't be careless about safety. They wouldn't lose the big picture for the small. A total of more than 1,000 high-quality war horses were captured. At this time, they were all placed in a corner of the mountain. There was already a horse stump there. It was obvious that they were prepared. Another 6,000 black cavalry soldiers were completely wiped out. Fang Dingshan's expression became extremely ugly when he saw this. In less than an hour, they had already lost 9,000 black cavalry soldiers. Fang Dingshan's heart ached. He had spent a lot of effort to train every single one of these black cavalry soldiers. On the battlefield, he felt that it was not worth it even if they were replaced by 2 or 3 5-star army soldiers. But now, 9,000 black cavalry soldiers rushed out and didn't even hurt a single hair on the enemy's head. This was very difficult for him to accept. The other generals stood in the big tent at this moment, not knowing what to do. If someone had told them before today that 2,000 enemies would be enough to render them helpless, they would probably have laughed out loud. But when the truth really happened, they realized that nothing was impossible. What was worse was that they didn't know what to do. Retreating was impossible. It wasn't easy to catch Bugnam of Gojoseon, and the scouts would report the surrounding situation every hour. Until now, there were no signs of other 5-star army reinforcements. How could they give up such a rare opportunity? If they couldn't retreat, then they could only charge. But how could they charge to reduce their losses and achieve their goal? Although it was called a siege, there were many ways to do so. For example, the most commonly used method was to surround the enemy without fighting. They would wait for the enemy to run out of food and water. Then they would surround the enemy and block the enemy. But the problem was that Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was surrounded, wouldn't give them too much time. Who knew how many 5-star army soldiers had already received the news and were rushing here? Just the word wait was enough to make them fall into a disadvantage. Continue to attack. I want to see how much gunpowder they have. Mu Qiong, you take command. Only send out 500 cavalrymen at a time. Spread out and waste the enemy's gunpowder. Fang Dingshan was naturally unwilling to give up such a good opportunity. After thinking for a while, he made this decision. General is wise. After hearing Fang Dingshan's decision, the other generals cupped their fists and looked as if it was only natural. No matter what, a small-scale attack would reduce the risk of their lives. In their hearts, they also wanted to see how much gunpowder this 2005-star army had. Once the enemy ran out of gunpowder, it would be time for them to charge forward and seize victory. Mu Qiong accepted the order and sent out the first 500 cavalrymen. These 500 cavalrymen split into 3 different directions and charged towards the peak of Chiyun Mountain. The formation was very scattered, and this was the best way to distract the enemy's gunpowder. At the peak of the mountain, 2 hours had passed. It was finally the second team's turn to fight. However, what was depressing was that after 15 minutes, the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen still did not make any moves. This made Captain Dao Xiao unable to hold it in any longer and cursed out loud. What's going on? Did they admit defeat? I say, if you have the guts, come at me. I'll be waiting for you here. Perhaps it was because of his cursing, not far away, they could finally see the figures of the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen. However, compared to the previous 2 attacks, there were much fewer of them. With the mindset that a few pieces were still meat, Dao Zhao's second team soldiers were still in high spirits. Everyone, follow your positions and focus on your targets. Don't waste bullets. Try to hit them with one shot. Dao Xiao was smart. He did not have as many enemies as the first team, so in terms of killing, he could not compare. Since that was the case, Then he would compete with his marksmanship. If he could kill an opponent with one shot, then even if there were fewer enemies, he would still be able to shine. 800 muskets against 500 enemies. Before the battle even started, the result was already decided. In just 2 rounds of shooting, many of the soldiers did not even fire a single shot, and the 500 cavalrymen were all sent to meet the King of Hell. Yang Chendong had already arrived at the front of the formation. He had clearly seen what had just happened, and his heart was filled with emotions. If he had not personally been on the battlefield, he would not have thought that victory would be so simple. When the 8-nation alliance first entered Beijing, there were only 10,000 of them. However, they were able to beat up the Qing dynasty's army, which seemed to have a lot of resources, to the point where they could not even tell which way was north. That was because they had been constantly attacking. They were not as well prepared and well equipped as he was. The advantage of firearms against cold weapons was simply too great. On the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen's side, another 500 cavalrymen died. If one looked closely, they did not even make a splash on the battlefield. Mu Qiong's expression became very ugly. He really wanted to ask General Fang Dingshan to tell him that the battle could not continue like this, but he did not dare to. Before he received any new orders, he could only continue to charge. He only hoped that these people would waste the 5-star army's gunpowder and prepare for the final charge. Just like that, every hour or so, the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen would charge. The number of people charging varied. Sometimes there were 500 of them, while other times there were only 200 to 300 of them. They were using their lives to fight the Black Cavalry's gunpowder consumption. However, wasn't this giving the Black Cavalry a chance to practice target shooting? This was a real enemy, and such a chance to practice target shooting was rare. Every soldier took the opportunity to ensure that they did not fire. If they did, they would be able to take the enemy's life. The sky quickly darkened, but the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's attack did not stop. They already knew that there were only 2,000 Black Cavalry Dragon Guards in the mountains, so they thought that even if they had to waste time, they would exhaust the enemy's strength. In this regard, Beta Persei asked for instructions from Yang Chendong, and as expected, he took measures to deal with it. A team of 200 people was the norm, and the rest were all to rest. In this way, the problem was easily solved. Not long after, all kinds of snoring and grinding sounds came from the mountains. Compared to the Black Cavalry sleeping soundly, Fang Dingshan was not in the mood to sleep at all. He walked out of the main tent and looked at Qi Yunshan, who was several miles away. His eyes flashed with an indescribable anger. "Just you wait. When my reinforcements arrive tomorrow, we will launch a charge all over the mountains and plains. At that time, I don't believe that you will still have 1,000 hands and feet. Let's see who will be the final victor." Fang Dingshan was already angry. He swore that he would take revenge. For this, he would rather fill in the 100,000 lives here. As long as he could kill Yang Chendong, everything would be worth it. Without a leader, the 5-star army would not be a threat to Baiming. Chapter 1337. At the same time, Yang Chendong, who was on Qiyun Mountain, had also woken up. When he saw that Wang Shan had also fallen asleep on his bed, he did not disturb him. Instead, he sat in front of the telegraph machine and began to report to the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division, the new 101st Army, and the divisions directly under them. Looking at the situation on the battlefield today, his safety was naturally not a problem. Even so, what he needed to do now was not for these people to come and help him. Instead, he needed them to set up an inescapable net outside the battlefield. When the Baiming Liaodong cavalry was defeated and retreated, they would surround and eliminate the enemy. Yang Chendong wanted to use this battle to get rid of the malignant tumor of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. He wanted to use this battle to shut the mouths of the Baiming people and slap their faces. He wanted to make them uncontrollably afraid and fearful when they thought of him. Whether it was waiting or anticipating, the sky finally brightened. Both sides seemed to have formed some kind of tacit agreement. They stopped fighting and started to make breakfast. For a moment, smoke rose in spirals and floated in the sky above and below the mountain. Fang Dingshan quickly finished his breakfast. Mu Qiong walked into the main tent with a blood-red face. He did not sleep last night as he continuously planned all kinds of attacks. Unfortunately, there was almost no effect. He did not even know if this kind of attack affected the sleep of the Black Cavalry. Seeing Mu Qiong walk in, Fang Dingshan sat up straight and asked with a trace of expectation, "How is it?" He already knew that the result would not be good. Otherwise, he would not have sent people to find Mu Qiong. Mu Qiong would have taken the initiative to come. This subordinate is guilty. Mu Qiong did not say anything else and knelt on the ground. Although it was Fang Dingshan who gave the order to continuously attack, Fang Dingshan was a superior. He was the one who carried out the order. If there was a problem, he would have to take responsibility. Fortunately, although Fang Dingshan was greedy for power, he was not an unreasonable person. "Alright, stand up and speak." This general gave the order. "No matter what the result is, I will not blame you." "Thank you, General." Mu Qiong's face finally looked better and he spoke more clearly. "General, after the sky turned dark yesterday, I continuously ordered my men to charge. There were a total of 13 times, and nearly 3,000 cavalrymen were killed. Due to the cover of the night, only 7 of them managed to escape, and 5 of them were injured." Fang Dingshan's face darkened when he heard that they had lost so much in one night. However, he still asked expectantly, "Did anyone manage to get to the top of the mountain? Do you know how much gunpowder they have left?" "The defenses on the mountain are tight. We don't have a chance to rush up." Mu Qiong lowered his head and said nervously. Although Fang Dingshan had expected this outcome, he still sighed in disappointment when he heard it. "Is Qiyun Mountain really so heavily guarded?" "Yes, they have something that can light up everything. Once we charge, this thing will appear and all of our cavalrymen will be exposed. They won't even have time to react before they are shot dead by firearms." Mu Qiong was amazed by the advanced weaponry of the Black Cavalry as he spoke with lingering fear. He would never forget that once the thing that could light up everything appeared, it would be as bright as day on the top of the mountain, and no one would be able to hide from it. "If that's the case, we can't even attack at night." Fang Dingshan was shocked to hear that such an advanced weapon had appeared. He had completely given up on the idea of attacking at night. "Yes, once that thing appears, the cavalrymen will be unprepared and will not be able to adapt to it. Especially the war horses, they will neigh uncontrollably and will not be able to charge at full speed." Mu Qiong wanted to continue exaggerating the power of the weapon, but Fang Dingshan interrupted him. "Alright, I got it. Just go and rest." "General, aren't we going to attack later?" Mu Qiong was naturally happy to hear that he could rest, but he was also worried that he would be woken up before he could fall asleep, so he asked. "Wait, General Luo will be here soon. Once he arrives, we will launch a big attack. No matter what, this time we must take down Qiyun Mountain and take Bugnam of Gojoseon's head." Fang Dingshan was almost furious as he spoke. If one listened carefully, one could hear the sound of teeth gnashing. The battlefield suddenly quieted down. This made Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao unhappy. After resting for a night, they thought that the battle would continue and they would be able to kill to their heart's content. However, Baiming's Liaodong cavalry was terrified. This was really disappointing. "Don't worry, it's just the darkness before dawn. Perhaps the big attack will begin soon." Yang Chendong's face was calm, but his words were full of murderous intent. He didn't believe that Baiming's Liaodong cavalry would give up the chance to kill him. They weren't attacking now, but they were just waiting. The more they acted like this, the more it meant that the scale of the next attack would be huge. In the eyes of the Black Cavalry, Yang Chendong was like a god. Since he said so, no one doubted him. Knowing that a big battle was imminent, all the soldiers began to clean their guns and reload, preparing for the battle that could erupt at any time. Soon it was noon. Baiming's Liaodong cavalry still didn't move, but there were rumbling sounds of horses galloping on the ground not far away. As dust rose into the air, Deputy General Luo Baikuan finally brought the rest of the Baiming's Liaodong cavalry over. A total of 85,000 Baiming's Liaodong cavalry gathered together. Looking down from the mountain, it was a black mass. It was a spectacular sight. "Are they finally here?" Yang Chendong took the binoculars and looked down the mountain. After seeing everything clearly, a cold smile appeared on his face. He had a feeling that the enemy's charge would begin soon. At this moment, he couldn't help but sigh at how difficult Fang Dingshan was to deal with. Imagine, if they attacked in the afternoon, there was no need to talk about using it. But if they failed, they could use the night to retreat. That way, even if there was an ambush outside, it would be extremely difficult to catch them all. Before planning for victory, one had to think about defeat. This was a quality that a good general had to have. Come on, adjust the muzzles. Once the enemy attacks, immediately launch a blanket attack on the enemy camp. This time, we need to kill as many of the enemy's forces as possible, so that they won't be able to pose any threat for a while. Yang Chendong said as if he was preparing for a rainy day. If the enemy wanted to do something ruthless, why wouldn't he do the same? At that moment, the 30 100mm mortars on the mountain were fully prepared. Other than that, a few flamethrowers and grenades were also taken out. The light and heavy machine guns were loaded with ammunition to ensure that once they opened fire, they would be able to continuously kill the enemy. Send a telegram to the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Division of the new army, and the subordinate division to prepare to face the scattered enemy. Yang Chendong didn't forget about the cavalry army outside. This was enough to prove his confidence in the Black Cavalry. At the foot of the mountain, Luo Baiquan walked into the main tent in full armor and came in front of Fang Dingshan. Once he entered the tent, Luo Baiquan said anxiously, "General, is Bugnam of Gojoseon sure that he's on the mountain?" Fang Dingshan nodded and answered with a very confident tone. Hearing this answer, Luo Baiquan smiled. He gave up the opportunity to completely annihilate the heavy cavalry regiment to come here. If Bugnam of Gojoseon wasn't on the mountain and there were only 2,000 black cavalry soldiers, he wouldn't be interested. But now, it was different. If he could kill Yang Chendong, it would definitely be a great achievement. No matter how many heavy cavalry regiments he annihilated, it would still be incomparable. "General, when are we going to attack?" Luo Baiquan didn't know the power of the firearms in the black cavalry soldiers' hands. At this moment, he was a little anxious. Perhaps he didn't even put the black cavalry in his eyes. After all, there were only 2,000 people. No matter how powerful they were, it was only 2,000 people. Against almost 100,000 elite Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry, what could they do? Seeing Luo Baiquan's confidence, Fang Dingshan wanted to come to the same conclusion. But when he thought of the big loss he suffered yesterday, he had to be realistic. They have firearms. Don't underestimate them. Firearms? When Luo Baiquan heard this, he still said disapprovingly, "I've seen firearms before. Just like the 20,000 firearms camp that Gao Yu brought, it's just SOSO. We can take it down with one charge. There are only 2,000 enemies here. What can they do? We have the advantage in numbers. Victory is not a problem at all." Luo Baiquan's confident words were heard by Fang Dingshan, and he was very encouraged. Yes, we have the advantage in numbers. Even if the enemy's firearms are powerful, they can't kill us all. As long as we can rush to the top of the mountain, victory will be ours. Fang Dingshan, who had received encouragement, was grinning from ear to ear. Then he called in the generals to make arrangements for the battle. At this moment, he seemed to be able to see the scene of Yang Chendong's head being chopped off and presented to the Daizong Emperor. Looking down from the bottom of the mountain, he could see the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry gathering their troops. Seeing more and more enemies getting on their horses, Yang Chendong put down his binoculars after he pulled out his sabers. "Prepare to load the ammunition. Fire the cannons." Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry was ready to charge. Yang Chendong couldn't just let them do as they pleased. After all, the difference in numbers was too great. If he really waited for the enemy to charge in front of him before he opened fire, with the cavalry's speed, the enemy would reach him in 300 meters. If that was the case, he would be in danger. He couldn't just sit there and wait for death. He had to strike first. He believed that since the enemy decided to charge, they wouldn't stop just because he made the first move. Chapter 1338. Once the order was given, the 30 mortars that had been prepared and calibrated were immediately loaded with ammunition. When Yang Chendong saw the 30 soldiers holding 30 cannonballs looking at him, he didn't hesitate and said, "Load and fire." Fire. With a loud shout, the 30 cannonballs were quickly swallowed by the cannon barrel. Then there was a loud rumbling sound. The cannonballs drew a beautiful arc in the sky and fell towards the camp of the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry. At this moment, the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry were still preparing. There were simply too many people. There had to be an arrangement as to who would attack first and who would follow suit. Otherwise, if they all rushed forward, there would be no space for them to display their skills. They might even end up crowding each other. Suddenly, there was a whistling sound in the sky. The Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry, who were still preparing, instinctively looked up. However, the speed of the cannonballs was too fast for them to catch sight of. When they raised their heads, they saw bursts of flames appearing beside them, followed by thunderous booms. Boom, 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 boom. When the cannonballs landed, they landed right in the middle of the dense crowd. For a moment, a powerful shockwave blew over like a gale. The northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry were thrown off their horses like kites with their strings cut. Some of the war horses were also frightened and began to flee in all directions while neighing incessantly. The war horse, which had always been docile, no longer recognized its owner. In its shock, it ran around randomly, crashing into all directions. Who knew how many of the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry were knocked to the ground and trampled by the horses' hooves? The cannonballs sounded and tents were overturned. Some even caused a sea of fire, giving people a feeling of purgatory. Don't panic, don't panic. Follow me and charge. Charge. Luo Baikuan saw the cannonballs falling and messing up the formation of the army. He was naturally furious. While he was shocked by the power of the Black Cavalry's cannonballs, he made a bold decision to charge immediately. Otherwise, who knew how messy the army would be if this continued and whether they would have the ability to counterattack. The roar of the cannonballs and explosions disrupted the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's formation, making them unable to gather on time and launch a large-scale charge. It also forced the enemy to attack as soon as possible. Calling it a decisive battle was a bit of an exaggeration. One side had 80,000 elite cavalry while the other side only had 2,000 black cavalry. The difference in numbers was too great. Calling it a decisive battle was a bit wrong because this was a one-sided massacre. It had nothing to do with a decisive battle. Calling it a decisive battle was inappropriate. There had never been a decisive battle where one side had lost soldiers and generals while the other side had no losses. Rather than calling it a decisive battle, it was more appropriate to call it a suicidal battle. The roar of the cannonballs continued. One cannonball after another landed in the camp of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Whether it was those who were about to charge, those who were preparing to charge, or those who were left behind, none of them were spared. This was because no one knew where the next cannonball would land and who it would kill. The sound of gunfire continued like the firecrackers set off by the rich during the New Year. There was no sign of it stopping. As the bullets were fired, the war horses that were charging forward were hit one after another. The cavalrymen on the war horses were hit one after another. They had no choice but to fall to the side with their horses. The sound of explosions continued. When the enemy was about 100 meters away from them, rocket launchers fired one after another, landing in the crowd, causing waves of explosions and screams of agony. If the enemy was a bit closer, the grenades would fall from the sky like raindrops falling from the sky. At the same time, they would create a huge blaze, and at the same time, they would also kill and injure the northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. The 2,000 black cavalry on Chiyun Mountain divided up the work in an orderly manner. Some were firing cannonballs, some were shooting, and some were throwing grenades. They were all busy at this moment. Almost all of the 2,000 people were using it. No one stopped to rest. Everyone was very busy. Although it was very tiring, it was worth it. It was because this kind of battle was not something that could be encountered all the time. Fortunately, the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry had strict discipline and a clear goal. They wanted to kill Yang Chendong wholeheartedly. If it was another opponent, they would have been scared away. Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's losses continued to increase. More than half of 1,000 people would be lost before they reached the halfway point of the mountain. When they were only a few dozen meters away, not a single one would be left. The highest peak of Chiyun Mountain seemed to have become a natural moat. A huge gap completely separated the two sides. Even if you had the power to split the sky, you would still not be able to take a step forward. Charge, continue to charge. Don't be afraid of death. They only have 2,000 cavalry. Luo Baikuan had already stopped his warhorse. He brought some of his soldiers to hide behind a few big trees. They used the branches to hide themselves. The losses were so great that Luo Baikuan's heart was bleeding at every moment. However, he could no longer shout for them to stop. After fighting for so long, if they stopped, then all of their previous efforts would be wasted. He wanted to see how much gunpowder the enemy had. He did not believe that his 80,000 cavalry would not be able to exhaust the enemy's gunpowder. As long as the enemy's firearms could not be used, he believed that the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry's spit could take Bugnam of Gojoseon's life. The Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry continued to charge. Although many people saw the power of the firearms, they could only continue to charge since their superiors did not give the order to retreat or stop attacking. This was especially true when some of their fellow soldiers had died right beside them, which made them feel deeply stimulated. At this moment, they were like mad bulls. They only knew to keep moving forward. They only had one goal, which was to rush to the top of the mountain and kill the Black Knight Dragon Guards. The charge was still going on. At a certain camp at the foot of the mountain, Fong Dingshan was already vomiting blood from the heartache. The Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry was an elite cavalry unit that he had painstakingly built. In an environment where Baiming lacked warhorses, it was easy to imagine how difficult it was to form a cavalry unit with 100,000 people. For this reason, the Daizong Emperor did not hesitate to take out money from the state treasury from various ministers and the Northern Ming Bank to make up for the shortfall, giving him sufficient support in the hopes that he would be able to raise the army and restore the glory of the Northern Ming army. In this army that even the emperor had invested a lot of money into, Fong Dingshan had put in a lot of effort. He did not fear the dangers of the journey and came to Liaodong. With his silver tongue and large amounts of money, he persuaded many strong young men to join the army. He also went to the prison and saved some Mongolian prisoners and sent them to the army. He also found many merchants who often went to the grasslands and used a high price to buy Mongolian men who were skilled in horse riding. He also walked through many Baiming army units and picked out many strong soldiers to fill the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. It could be said that the internal structure of the Baiming Liaodong Iron Cavalry was very complicated. It took a lot of effort for each person to join. Fortunately, the results were satisfactory. Even the famous heavy cavalry unit of the 5-star army was no match for them. This gave Fong Dingshan hope and a future. This was also the reason why he dared to bring the army here even though he knew that Yang Chendong had appeared and was already prepared. He firmly believed that no matter how strong the opponent was, he still had a great advantage against nearly 100,000 cavalry with only 2,000 men. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. At this time, Fong Dingshan was trapped in this argument. Seeing elite cavalrymen charging out one after another, only to quickly fall on the path of the charge. Their sabers were not stained with blood, and their strength had not been fully displayed, they were already dead. That kind of feeling made his heart ache and palpitate. What kind of brain did Bugnam of Gojoseon have to create so many powerful firearms? Just what kind of person was Wu Nan Wang to be able to create such a battle formation with the few against the many? What kind of courage did Bugnam of Gojoseon have to face 100,000 with 2,000 men and not be afraid? Instead, he was filled with killing intent. At this moment, Fong Dingshan hated Yang Chendong to the core. If cursing could kill someone, then even 1,000 lives would not be enough for Bugnam of Gojoseon. His eyes were red, his heart was bleeding, and blood was flowing out of the corner of his mouth because of the heartache. Gradually, Fong Dingshan, who was always calm and composed and never moved in the slightest, became more and more unsightly. His mental endurance had reached its limit, and he was about to collapse. "General, should we retreat?" Mu Qiong was standing guard beside Fang Dingshan. He watched as countless cavalrymen charged forward, but soon there was no news of them. The lively young lad had turned into a corpse that could not move at all. How could his heart not bleed? Before he knew how much gunpowder Bugnam of Gojoseon had prepared, he thought that such a reckless charge would not solve anything, so he thought of persuading them to stop. Fang Dingshan's face showed a hint of hesitation and struggle, but he quickly shook his head. "No, we can't stop." Indeed, they could not stop. If this could not take down Yang Chendong, Fang Dingshan did not know when he would have the chance to kill this person. As long as Yang Chendong did not die, Baiming would be in danger, and it was not impossible for the country to be destroyed. Therefore, no matter how high the price he had to pay, Fang Dingshan could not retreat, and he could not hesitate. He wanted to pay with lives today. He wanted to see how long the 5-star army could last. Did they not know how tiring it was to kill people? Baiming's Liaodong cavalry did not show any signs of stopping, and the gunshots on Chiyun Mountain did not stop either. However, if one listened carefully, the gunshots were not as intense as before. Chapter 1339. On the top of the mountain, the heavy machine guns had already become scalding hot due to overheating. Some light machine guns also had the same problem. Fortunately, there was enough water on the mountain. At this moment, buckets of water were poured under the guns, igniting a large amount of steam. Stop the light and light machine guns appropriately and use them after cooling down. All the people who have retreated, go get grenades and blow up these enemies. Yang Chendong's voice replaced Beta Persei's. In a war that had never been organized with such intensity, Beta Persei's commanding ability obviously still needed to be improved. Fortunately, Yang Chendong in his previous life had seen all kinds of storms and waves, so he quickly replaced the commanding position. Under his command, the 2,000 black cavalry did their own things in an orderly manner and dealt a heavy blow to the enemy. Beta Persei was still learning seriously from the side. However, he didn't know if there would be another chance to command like this. After all, not every enemy was as brave, fearless, and disciplined as Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. Countless grenades were thrown down the mountain. After a series of explosions and smoke, another batch of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry fell on the charging road. Yang Chendong took this opportunity to wipe the sweat on his forehead. At this moment, he had to admit that Baiming's Liaodong cavalry's bravery was beyond his expectations. If it wasn't for his ample preparation, he was afraid that the enemy might have really rushed up. If that was the case, with only the 2,000 black cavalry, he could only rely on Datsong to rush out. That was his trump card, and he wouldn't use it easily. Otherwise, some things wouldn't be easy to explain. The bravery of Baiming's Liaodong cavalry was beyond Yang Chendong's expectations, but how could it not be a happy thing? The fiercer the other party charged now, the greater the losses would be, and the less of a threat they might pose to him in the future. It was even possible to wipe them all out here. That way, the threat of Baiming would be greatly reduced, and the entire 5-star army would be able to spare more energy and manpower to do what they wanted to do. The sound of gunfire was still going on. For hours later, the sky outside was completely dark. The only thing that could be seen on the battlefield was the muzzle flashes that constantly spewed out bullets, as well as the flares that were fired into the air from time to time. Every time the flare lit up, gunshots would ring out. Groups of northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong iron cavalry would fall down like sand blown by the wind. This scene was clearly seen by everyone under the illumination of the flares. As more and more of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry became corpses, the morale of the army began to waver. No one in the world was willing to die. As long as there was a bit of hope to live, they wouldn't take the initiative to seek death. The previous attack was completely due to the strict discipline of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry, and the fact that the target was only 2,000 people, which gave countless people hope. But now, seeing that the 5-star army's gunfire didn't seem to stop, and even the heavy and light machine guns that had stopped firing were starting to ring out again, some of the soldiers who thought that the 5-star army didn't have enough gunpowder finally began to feel disappointed. There was no chance of victory at all, and they were only using human lives to fill the gap. When would this kind of battle end? If the 80,000 cavalry were all here, but the other party still had gunpowder, what would they do? Wouldn't that mean that everyone had died here for nothing? Everyone had their own selfish motives, especially on a battlefield where there was no chance of victory. Some people couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. The first to make a move were the Mongolian grassland men that Fang Dingshan had spent a lot of money to invite from the merchants. They were like mercenaries and they came here for money. As long as someone paid them, they would give their lives. Even if they died in battle, they wouldn't regret it. But even if they knew that they would die, they still wanted to charge. That wasn't something a greedy person would do. Even if they had money, they had to be alive to spend it. When they saw that the 5-star army was still full of firepower, these people were shaken. Then, some self-proclaimed smart people began to flee under the cover of the night when no one was watching them. When the first person retreated, the people around him quickly followed suit. Soon, more and more cavalrymen began to disregard the military order and retreat. Their retreat was like a domino effect, causing more and more cavalrymen to retreat. Humans were social animals. What they would do the most was follow suit. When they saw that the people around them had begun to retreat, it was their nature to retreat as well. As for the so-called consequences, that was a matter for the future. As a result, on the battlefield, in the dark, more and more Baiming Liaodong cavalry started to retreat. It was like a plague that spread to everyone. Many cavalry who didn't know what was going on thought that it was an order from the general and also retreated. Luo Baikuan, who was hiding under the cover of the trees, quickly realized that something was wrong. He knew that the thing he was most worried about had happened. In order to obtain the final victory, there was no time for him to think. He rushed out from his hiding place and shouted, "Everyone listen to my order. Continue to charge. Charge. Those who retreat will die." After shouting this, Luo Baikuan rode his warhorse into the battlefield and slashed at the head of a Mongolian soldier who was retreating. Swoosh. With one slash, a head rolled to the ground. At this time, Luo Baikuan was like a killing god. He ignored the blood splattered on his body as he shouted loudly, "This general is here. Those who retreat will be killed." Luo Baikuan used his actions to show everyone what battlefield discipline was. This action also frightened many of the surrounding cavalrymen. The soldiers who originally wanted to retreat had no choice but to stop what they were doing. Phew! Seeing that the army had temporarily stabilized, Luo Baikuan let out a sigh of relief. In order to increase the victory, he shouted, "They only have 2,000 people. They can't have so much gunpowder. As long as we persevere, victory will be ours." He was still cheering his subordinates on, encouraging them to continue to charge. It could also be said that he was encouraging them to die. Suddenly, a flare lit up in the sky and lit up the mountainside like it was daytime. With the help of the flare, the black cavalry at the top of the mountain saw everything. When they saw a small number of Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen, Ba Daojiang, who was in charge of artillery support, laughed. "Come on, charge to the mountainside and open fire." When the flare lit up, Luo Baikuan, who was riding on his horse, had a bad feeling. However, he didn't retreat immediately because he knew that many soldiers were looking at him. If he were to hide like this, the morale of the army would definitely be greatly affected. He was afraid that the army would really be routed. With a fluke mentality, Luo Baikuan continued to shout to the soldiers gathered around him, "There is no one in this world that can't be killed. We have a strong advantage in numbers. As long as everyone works together, victory will definitely belong to us. As long as we can kill Bugnam of Gojoseon, we will all be heroes. The great Ming dynasty will remember us and we will be conferred the title of market." Chirp, boom. Just as Luo Baikuan was encouraging the morale of the army, suddenly, dozens of cannonballs fell from the sky and covered their area. Coincidentally, one of the cannonballs landed 3 meters away from Luo Baikuan. Following a loud bang, an indescribable wave of air enveloped Luo Baikuan. Luo Baikuan, who was still thinking of saying something on his warhorse, felt his chest tighten. Then he was separated from his warhorse and flew into the air. Luo Baikuan, who was flying in the air, still had his mouth open. However, because his internal organs were severely injured, he could no longer utter a single word. As he opened and closed his mouth, streams of dark red blood flowed out. Luo Baiquan was actually blown away. One could imagine that the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen who had recovered some of their morale could not take it anymore. Their general was dead, so why were they still guarding here? Even if they were to charge, who would they charge for? Run. No one knew who shouted so loudly, but the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen began to collapse. This move quickly became a trend that no one could stop. Fang Dingshan, who was waiting for the news of victory, suddenly saw countless black figures retreating from the foot of the mountain. His eyes could not help but widen. He knew that the result he was most afraid of had happened. Before this, Fang Dingshan had already made up his mind. As long as the soldiers did not retreat, he would not retreat. Even if he had to sacrifice all of the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen, as long as he could kill Yang Chendong, everything would be worth it. But now, the army suddenly retreated. He did not give such a military order, so there was only one result. The army's morale and momentum were gone. This was the only result. It's over, it's over. Tears fell from the corner of Fang Dingshan's eyes. He knew that the situation was over. At this time, even if he stood out and wanted to boost the army's morale, it was obviously impossible. Dispersing was dispersing. It was not something that anyone could gather in a short period of time. Fang Dingshan, who said that it was over, did not manage to catch his breath and immediately fainted. If Mu Qiong hadn't reacted quickly enough and caught him, he would have been seriously injured from the fall. Mu Qiong did not understand why the general suddenly fainted. Just as he was panicking, a fast horse came in front of him. Reporting, General Luo Baiquan has died in battle. The army has begun to retreat. Chapter 1340. What? This bad news finally made Mu Qiong understand what had happened. He sighed at how fast the general's reaction was, and his expression changed. The army had retreated. Didn't that mean that they had lost the battle? Since they had lost, they had to fight the way they lost. Thinking of this, he immediately said, "Even so, we can't just sit here and wait for death. All troops retreat and find a safe place to wait for the general to wake up." Retreat. Without Fang Dingshan and Luo Baiquan, Mu Qiong's orders were naturally the most important. Under the command of this general who had long wanted to retreat, the army could finally retreat openly. The Baiming Liaodong cavalry who had received the military order and were prepared to risk their lives to charge finally heaved a sigh of relief. Then, none of them charged up the mountain. They turned around and fled in all directions without any pattern. On the peak of Chiyun Mountain, the exhausted black cavalry was still waiting for the Baiming Liaodong cavalry to charge. But all of a sudden, the battlefield quieted down, which made everyone feel that it was unreal. For the past few hours, the enemy's warhorses had been charging. Shouts and screams shook the sky. Under the sound of guns and cannons, many people's ears were buzzing. They were not used to the sudden silence. However, when Yang Chendong heard that there was no sound of horses charging, his whole body shook. After taking a look through the binoculars, he became even more determined. He said, "The Baiming Liaodong cavalry can't win and want to escape. Amen, fire the cannons. Even if they want to escape, we have to skin them alive." Boom boom boom, boom boom boom. Under Yang Chendong's order, the cannons rumbled. Who knew how many of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry who were fleeing were hit by the cannons and died tragically on the ground? Soon, there was a roar of excitement on Chiyun Mountain. "We won! We won!" Yang Er shouted. At the same time, he jumped up and down nonstop. The other commanders and soldiers were also cheering loudly, celebrating the moment of victory. Even if they had the most advanced firearms in their hands, no one could guarantee that they would win against nearly 100,000 cavalry with only 2,000 soldiers. Only they themselves would know if there were people who were worried or on edge during the process. And now, they had finally obtained the final victory. At this moment, everyone was extremely excited. At the same time, they looked at Yang Chendong with admiration. This was their king. He fought against 100,000 with 2,000 soldiers and forced the enemy to retreat. Although there were many people in history who won against the enemy, only their king could achieve such a glorious result. They were proud to be part of their king's side. How many people did we kill? Among the cheers, it was unknown who had suddenly said such a sentence, but it instantly attracted everyone's attention. 30,000? I think it's more than that. Our first platoon killed nearly 20,000 people. Chiu Vi shook his head. Obviously, he was dissatisfied with the number of soldiers. That's right. I think there were at least 40,000 people. Our second platoon also killed nearly 20,000 people. Dao Xiao also jumped out. Although he did not have to worry about the military merit because he was with Yang Qindong, he still had to fight for it. Are you kidding me? Did our artillery team not do anything? We killed at least 10,000 people. Ba Daojiang also stood out. He would never allow anyone to take away his achievement. Not even the two platoon leaders. For a moment, there was a heated discussion about how many people they had killed. Yang Qindong did not participate. Because of the firearms and the dark sky, he did not know how many people they had killed. However, he believed that he would get the result soon. Because outside of Qian Mountain, the 1st Cavalry Division, the 101st Division of the new 1st Army, and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 2nd Army were all in place. As long as they stopped the Baiming Liaodong cavalry, they would be able to get a rough idea of how many people they had lost. Yes, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 2nd Army had also arrived outside of Qian Mountain. They were led by the commander of the Mercenary Division. His original mission was to guard Tulu City with 2 divisions to prevent the 50,000 Baiming army inside the city from converging with the 80,000 Baiming army outside the city. However, as the commander of the Mercenary Division that Yang Qindong had entrusted with such an important task, he was not a passive person. When he arrived on the battlefield, he quickly displayed his skills. He sent people to disguise themselves as the Baiming army to open the city gates and force their way into Tulu City. The sudden arrival of the 2 divisions of cavalry caused the 50,000 Baiming army to panic. Most of them were new soldiers who had never been on the battlefield. Although they had undergone some training, they had never seen real combat. They had never even seen blood. How could they be a match for the elite new 2nd Army cavalry? In just a little more than 4 hours, Tulu City had become the territory of the new 2nd Army. She had once come from this place, so she was naturally very familiar with every blade of grass and tree here. Soon she issued a series of correct orders. Not only did she take complete control of Tulu City, she also seized a large amount of food and 45,000 captives. After the great victory in Tulu City, Mercenary Division received news that Yang Qindong had used himself as bait to lure the Baiming Liaodong cavalry into Qiyun Mountain. He immediately handed over the task of defending the city to the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Li Jun. Then, he brought the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Qiao Chao, and hurried towards Qiyun Mountain. When Yang Qindong received the news that another division had joined, he was naturally overjoyed. This gave him even more confidence in surrounding the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. If it wasn't for the fact that the Black Cavalry had just gone through an intense battle and were all exhausted, he probably would have joined in the pursuit of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. Everyone has contributed and is tired. Leave behind 200 people to guard the city at night. Everyone else, take the time to rest. We'll clean up the battlefield when the sun rises. Yang Qindong laughed and said to everyone. After seeing everyone's excited smile, he didn't rest. Instead, he went to the simple sand table and looked at the surrounding situation. In this battle, he had already crippled the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. However, even if he didn't wipe them out, it was still an extremely important task. Otherwise, once the enemy was given enough time, it wouldn't take long for them to rise from the ashes. This wasn't the result Yang Qindong wanted to see. Looking at the sand table, Yang Qindong was thinking about where the Baiming Liaodong cavalry might escape. At the same time, a voice kept ringing in his mind. Tiger's Mane, Shi Bei, and Lu Zhuo will definitely be able to do it. They will definitely be able to deal a heavy blow to the Baiming Liaodong cavalry and eliminate this stubborn enemy. The Northern Ming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry had suffered a crushing defeat on Mount Qiun. After charging up the mountain and suffering heavy injuries, it could be said that their morale had plummeted. They no longer had their previous invincible momentum. At this moment, they were fleeing everywhere like stray dogs. Some were in groups of 1,000, some were in groups of 100, and some were in groups of a dozen or even a few people. The defeated soldiers were like this. There was no formation at all. They just dragged their battered bodies and ran without knowing where to go. Some people even lost their war horses. However, they still kept running in order to escape from Qiun Mountain. In their hearts, this was the gate to hell. No matter who stayed here, they would only die. The defeat of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry gave the 5-star army a great opportunity. The divisions of the various armies formed a huge encirclement with the company as a unit. Whenever they saw a defeated enemy, they would wait for an opportunity to attack. If there were a few more enemies, they would immediately send out a signal to ask for help from the other companies. In short, it was to seal off this area so that not a single bird could fly out. Yang Chendong's orders were exactly like this. Although he did not know how much damage the Baiming Liaodong cavalry had suffered in this battle, he believed that the enemy's discipline was loose and their morale was low. The 5-star army, who had always worshipped Yang Chendong's words, naturally acted according to the order, and the encirclement by the company was launched. The orders were given without any hesitation. However, not everyone had their own thoughts. For example, the heavy cavalry regiment commander Zhue Feng, who was hiding in a valley with a company, was currently waiting for a battle. His heart was beating like a drum. He was very clear about the strength of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. Even his heavy cavalry regiment was not a match for them. He also heard that the 6th young master only had 2,000 black cavalry. Could they really face 100,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry and not be defeated? If this was said by someone else, Zhue Feng would naturally not believe it. He would even accuse the other party of false military intelligence and punish them. However, this came from the 6th young master, so he did not dare to say anything. All this time, no one knew how many miracles Yang Chendong had created. It was to the point that everyone was used to him doing some shocking things and would not suspect anything. Zhue Feng was still thinking about the reliability of this matter. If it was true, how did the 6th young master do it? While this question was still flashing in his mind, the company commander suddenly said, "Commander Zhue Feng, there is a situation." Zhue Feng immediately put away his chaotic thoughts. He held the binoculars in his hand and looked up. He saw no less than 700 cavalry wearing the Northern Ming military uniform rushing towards them in a panic. Among these 700 people, only half of them had war horses. There were also some that only borrowed the power of their legs and held their ponytails. It seemed that this was the only way they would not fall behind. Only then would they be able to live and die with the main force. There are more than 700 people. Commander Zhue Feng, let's send the signal for reinforcements. This company commander only led 100 people. Seeing that the enemy was 7 times their number, he could not help but feel nervous. This was the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. It was rumored that they were very powerful. Even the heavy cavalry regiment had suffered a loss in their hands. Chapter 1341. Zhue Feng naturally saw the enemy's numbers, but he wasn't as flustered as the company commander beside him. Instead, he carefully looked through his binoculars and shook his head. Look, although the enemy has a lot of people, they are clearly defeated soldiers. The army has no formation and has no morale. So what if there are more of them? Although we only have 100 people, we can wait patiently. The morale of the army is not something the enemy can match. What is there to fear? Hearing Zhue Feng's bold words, the company commander understood why he could become a regiment commander. Moreover, he was the regiment commander of the heavy cavalry regiment. He wasn't any worse than a normal division commander. It turned out that she was this daring. Just this point alone was something that the current him could not compare to. Admiring Zhue Feng's courage, the company commander was also encouraged. Regiment Commander Zhue, you mean to say that we don't need to ask for help and can eat them with our own strength? That's right, this is a great merit. Could it be that everyone doesn't want to contribute? Zhu Feng was clear that these weren't soldiers of the heavy cavalry regiment. If he wanted to use his status as a regiment commander to suppress them, it wouldn't be too effective. Thus, he could only use benefits to entice them. The military merits of the 5-star army were not bad rewards. This was the magic weapon to defeat the enemy. When it came to contributions, the eyes of the 100 soldiers couldn't help but shine. Then, there was the sound of rapid breathing. After a few breaths, the company commander had already made a decision and said, "Regiment Commander Zhu, we will listen to you. We will do whatever you say." Zhu Feng was waiting for this sentence. He immediately replied with a "good," and then ordered, "Everyone, don't be anxious. After all, we are still at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. In a moment, we will divide into 10 groups and surround them. When the enemy is within 100 steps, we will suddenly use bows and arrows to attack from afar. Then, the 1st to 7th groups will charge out. The 8th to 10th groups will stay in place and continuously appear. This will give the enemy the feeling that we have a lot of troops and trick them. Do you understand?" As if he felt that he had not said enough, Wind-Chasing Wolf added, "Of course, you don't have to be afraid. If the enemy's momentum is too strong, we can retreat. Then we can send a signal and surround them with the other company commanders." Whether it was advancing or retreating, all of them had already been chosen. The warriors were no longer flustered, and they began to prepare according to the tactics that Windchaser had arranged. After the 100-man team was dispersed, it gave people the impression that their military strength had doubled, and there were hundreds of them. Just as the soldiers of each company reached their designated positions, the defeated Baiming Liaodong cavalry arrived within 100 steps of them. Windchaser took the lead and shot out an arrow. A Baiming Liaodong cavalry soldier at the front fell off his horse. Following that, another wave of arrows shot out and dozens of enemy soldiers were ambushed. This sudden attack caused the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong Iron Cavalry, who were already trembling with fear, to become even more chaotic. It was at this moment that Zhu Feng led 7 squads of warriors and charged out from the shadows, loudly shouting that those who surrendered would not be killed. Behind them, there was a cloud of dust. Those were the 30 warriors who were left behind, constantly running back and forth, creating a commotion to strengthen their momentum. The sudden appearance of the 5-star army was like a heavenly army descending from the heavens. It gave the Baiming Liaodong cavalry a heavy psychological blow. They were already like arrows at the end of their flight. Right now, they were already like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Any movement would cause them to feel fear. The Baiming Liaodong cavalry had already lost their basic judgment. When they saw the cloud of dust behind the 5-star army, they naturally thought that the main force of the 5-star army had arrived. They had already lost their will to fight. When they heard the shouts of those who surrendered would not be killed, they didn't stop at all. One by one, they threw down their weapons, jumped off their horses, and knelt on the ground. Perhaps in the hearts of these Baiming Liaodong cavalry, surrendering was not something shameful. As long as they could live, it was good. Just like on Chiyun Mountain, facing the barrage of guns and cannons, they couldn't find a way to surrender even if they wanted to. Now that the hope of living was in front of them, who wouldn't cherish it? This was like someone giving you a pillow when you were sleepy. Who would care if the pillow was suitable for your head? Zhu Feng was already prepared for a bloody battle. In his heart, unless it was necessary, he didn't want to ask for help from the other companies. After all, he had just lost a battle and now was the time to gain merit. He didn't want to let go of this opportunity. However, he never would have thought that these Baiming Liaodong cavalry would be so weak. After he jumped out with his men, they surrendered without a trace of struggle. This made him wonder if these were the elite Baiming Liaodong cavalry that had surrounded his heavy cavalry regiment. While Zhu Feng was doubting, how could the nearby 5-star army officers not be thinking the same thing? In a short period of time, it wasn't just this company that had encountered the enemy. Many of the 5-star army soldiers who were lying in ambush were also like this. The one similarity was that when they suddenly charged out, the Baiming Liaodong cavalry all chose to kneel and surrender. Under the lack of morale, who knew how many people had already chosen the path of surrender. They just didn't have the opportunity to do so before, but now that the opportunity had come, of course they had to firmly grasp it. Things were far simpler than imagined. Before the sky turned dark, the battle reports from the various companies were gathered before the several commanders and division commanders. From the statistics, in just a single day's time, they captured no less than 40,000 Northern Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. This was 40,000 people. If they wanted to capture 40,000 pigs alive, who knew how much effort it would take? From this, it could be seen that the Baiming Liaodong cavalry's morale was already in chaos and they had no will to fight. The most exaggerated thing was that they learned about the battle at Chiyun Mountain from the captives. When they learned that Yang Chendong only led 2,000 black cavalry and blocked the attacks of nearly 100,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry for more than a day and even heavily injured 40,000 people, everyone was so shocked that their jaws dropped. 2,000 against 100,000, not only did they obtain victory, they also killed 40,000 people and forced the others to retreat. What kind of combat power did they have to be able to accomplish this? Seeing this result, even the always confident Commander Tian who couldn't help but sigh. The Black Cavalry is so strong that our 1st Cavalry Division can't compare. After this battle, it was completely established that the Black Cavalry was the strongest army in the entire 5-star army. Although many people knew that the reason why they won was because of the great contributions of the guns and cannons, they couldn't help but admit that just the courage of 2,000 against 100,000 was not something an ordinary person could do. In just one day, they had captured 40,000 captives. This gave the 5-star army more confidence. The only fly in the ointment was that they didn't find their commander Fong Dingshan among the captives. According to the captives, their commander was protected by another general, Mu Qiong, and 2,000 people were together. There's no need to say more. From all the facts, Fong Dingshan still hasn't broken out of the encirclement. If I were him, I would definitely choose a place to break out of the encirclement tonight. After Tian, who heard this, he expressed his thoughts in front of the new 2nd Army's commander Shi Bei and the 101st Army's commander Lu Zhua. This point coincided with Shi Bei and Lu Zhua's thoughts. After the three of them looked at each other, they finally decided that the 1st Cavalry Division would take the initiative to find the enemy. In terms of individual combat power, the 1st Cavalry Division was naturally the strongest existence. Only by taking the initiative could they achieve the goal of finding and eliminating the enemy. Okay, our new 2nd Army will take the initiative to cooperate and shrink the encirclement to prevent the enemy from escaping. Shi Bei was very convinced by the 1st Cavalry Division. He also didn't forget how they had given him war horses when he was in trouble. Shi Bei took the initiative to cooperate. Although Lu Zhua also wanted to lead the troops to gain merit, he also knew that the bigger picture was more important. He immediately made the same promise. Many thanks. Please don't worry, our 1st Cavalry Division won't disappoint you. Tian, who took the initiative to salute Shi Bei and Lu Zhua, then strode out of the tent. Not long after, the 1st Cavalry Division's camp was bustling with activity. The army set out and disappeared into the night. 50 miles away from the encirclement of the 5-star army, in a valley called Luoshan Hill, Fong Dingshan, who had already woken up, was looking up at the sky with a worried expression. At this time, the sky was already completely dark. There were already many stars in the sky. He still remembered that at this time 2 days ago, he had close to 100,000 soldiers and was surrounded by Bugnam of Gojoseon's 2,000 cavalry. Who would have thought that in such a short period of time, the situation would become completely different? 100,000 elite cavalry had been defeated. Now, he only had 2,000 men by his side. Moreover, he had already lost his provisions. More importantly, he had lost his morale. How could he win a battle with such an army? Even if he could escape this time, even if the Daizong Emperor spared him, it would be difficult for him to do anything. He had lost his job, lost his army, and wasted countless Baiming's money. How could he still have the face to live in this world? Rather than go back and be looked down upon, or even be impeached by others, it would be better to die on the battlefield. Instead, he would leave behind a heroic reputation. His right hand slowly touched the right side of his waist. However, when he touched it, he discovered that the scabbard was still there, but the blade was nowhere to be seen. At this time, he remembered that when he was unconscious, he felt the weight on his waist loosen. Now that he thought about it, his weapon should have been taken away at that time. Needless to say, this matter was definitely done by Mu Qiong. He probably already knew that he would do something, but what could he say when the other party did it for his own good? AI. With a sigh, Fang Dingshan's eyes lost all color. He was like a walking corpse. At this time, he had no hope for the future. Chapter 1342. In a large tent less than 100 meters away from Fang Dingshan, Mu Qiong was discussing the future with several generals. The army had been defeated, and it was not something that could be salvaged by saying anything. The most important thing right now was how to escape from this place. No matter what, they could not be caught. The scouts have already reported that the soldiers who tried to break out during the day have all been captured. From this, it can be seen that the 5-star army has already set up an inescapable net. Even a bird would find it hard to fly out. As the host of the meeting, Mu Qiong stood at the head of the table and sighed as he spoke. His words caused the others in the meeting to lower their heads in silence. They could not escape, and surrendering was also impossible. Doing so would only implicate their loved ones in the capital. Where should they go from here? Seeing that no one spoke, Mu Qiong could guess their thoughts. Then, without any warning, he suddenly asked, "I ask all of you, are you afraid of death?" This question had been discussed countless times since ancient times. Moreover, there was no need to debate the results. Everyone was afraid of death. The only difference was to what extent they were afraid of death, and whether there were things more terrifying than death. Just like the current situation, the army had been defeated, and 100,000 elite cavalry were gone just like that. One could imagine how angry the emperor would be once he knew about this. There were also those civil officials in the court. They looked down on generals like them from the bottom of their hearts, and even privately called them ordinary people. In the past, it was the 5-star army that forced them into a corner. The Daizong emperor wanted to restore the glory of the great Ming dynasty and wanted to use military power to rule the country. However, now that they had lost the battle, it was time for them to jump out and criticize the emperor. If they didn't do so, they wouldn't be able to show their intelligence. If they didn't do so, they wouldn't be able to elevate their status and give them enough benefits. What the result was self-evident. If he escaped back, he might be able to survive. However, his life in the future would not be any better than death. Since being alive was no better than being dead, he might as well die. Of course, the prerequisite was that their deaths had to be worth something. No one answered immediately. Instead, everyone raised their heads to look at Mu Qiong, as if they wanted to ask something. He did not answer immediately, which gave Mu Qiong some confidence. He knew that he could finally speak his mind now. He cleared his throat and continued, "If everyone is afraid of death, then there's nothing to say. Whether you're willing to surrender or break out of the encirclement, this general will not stop you. However, if you are not afraid of death and are unwilling to give up and still want to fight, this general also has a plan that can work. That is, we will fight our way back to Chiyun Mountain. After such a long time, I believe that Bugnam of Gojoseon will think that we have escaped far away and will definitely let down his guard. If we suddenly attack and don't give them the time to fire their guns, then it is hard to say who will win and who will lose, but at least we will have a 50% chance of winning. If you can kill Bugnam of Gojoseon, think about it, how great of a meritorious service would that be? Heavens, how is this meritorious service? This is clearly a great service." At this moment, many people sucked in a breath of cold air. Everyone had different expressions, but they quickly calmed down again. When they looked at Mu Qiong, their eyes were filled with excitement as they said, "We are not afraid of death." This showed that they were not afraid of death, which meant that they agreed with Mu Qiong's plan and were determined to fight their way back. Although there would be danger if they went back, wasn't it also more dangerous than breaking out of the encirclement? Since that was the case, why not choose to play a big game? At least if they succeeded, not only would they not be guilty, they would also have a great service. This result was within Mu Qiong's expectations. Now that he finally got a definite answer, he also let out a long sigh of relief and said, "This is good. I can see that everyone is unyielding men. Since that is the case, this general will give the order. We will have a good rest tonight and rush back tomorrow morning. When we suddenly attack at noon, we will definitely be able to kill Bugnam of Gojoseon. At that time, everyone here will become meritorious officials of the great Ming dynasty. It is not impossible for you to be conferred the title of Marquis." The great Ming dynasty had always been conferred the title of Marquis based on military merit. And the title of Marquis was hereditary. It could be imagined that once they were conferred the title, it was equivalent to having a fixed iron rice bowl. In the future, their descendants would be able to enjoy endless benefits. Mu Qiong still had some ability. With just a few words, he stirred up the fighting spirit of the generals. At this moment, they could not wait to appear at the foot of Chiyun Mountain and kill their way up in one go. If it were not for the fact that the army had not had a good rest these few days, they would probably have done so. Thinking that tomorrow would be the day to show off their skills, the generals excitedly left the main tent and returned to their respective camps to rest. Mu Qiong walked out of the main tent and headed straight to where Fang Dingshan was. Walking over from afar, Mu Qiong looked at the somewhat bleak figure standing there. He took a deep breath and strode forward. Fang Dingshan didn't move when he heard the footsteps behind him. He already knew who they were and even knew what they were planning and discussing. However, he didn't care about it. Even if these people were discussing about surrendering to the five-star army, he would not find it strange. After all, when facing life and death, a person's true nature would often be revealed. How could a defeated general dare to be brave? At this moment, Fang Dingshan did not ask these subordinates to do anything. Even if these people really wanted to surrender, he would not blame them. However, he would definitely not be with these people. He had received a great favor from the great Ming dynasty, and he could only repay it with his life on the battlefield. "General." Mu Qiong walked up and clasped his fists. The night sky tonight is really beautiful." Looking up at the sky, Fang Dingshan sighed emotionally. Perhaps he did not have long to live, but Fang Dingshan looked at everything so beautifully because it was very likely that he would not see it again in the future. Of course, this did not exclude the possibility that the unpolluted sky was indeed much cleaner than in the future. Yes, the night sky is very beautiful. Mu Qiong agreed. But we will probably see more of this kind of night sky in the future. Perhaps the night sky in the capital will be even more beautiful than here. When he heard the first half of the sentence, Fang Dingshan's expression did not change. However, when he heard the second half, his body suddenly trembled. He had heard many different meanings from these words. What did he mean by, "it will be even more beautiful than here"? What did he mean by, "the night sky in the capital will be even more beautiful than here"? Could it be that Mu Qiong was not prepared to surrender to the enemy? Could it be that he had misunderstood him? While Fang Dingshan was still thinking, Mu Qiong half knelt behind him. "General, this subordinate is guilty. This subordinate should not have hidden the counterattack plan from you. This way, everyone will have a slim chance of survival. However, we cannot just leave like this. We must take a gamble. General, please punish us." Mu Qiong had to apologize. Although there were only 2,000 cavalry in the camp, Fang Dingshan was still the great general. Logically speaking, this kind of plan should not have been hidden from him. However, he was worried that his idea would not be approved. In addition, Fang Dingshan seemed to have lost his morale, so he had no choice but to go around him. Now that the plan had been decided, he naturally had to tell the truth. Fang Dingshan had already accepted his fate. He had already prepared himself to borrow a knife and commit suicide the moment Mu Qiong spoke of surrendering. He was sure that the other party would agree to this request. However, he did not expect that they would actually want to counterattack. For a moment, his expression changed continuously. He actually did not react in time. Seeing that Fang Dingshan did not speak, Mu Qiong thought that the other party did not agree. He thought to himself, then continued, "General, our army has been defeated. The emperor will definitely be furious. Since that is the case, Why don't we take a gamble? Once we take Bugnam of Gojoseon's head, it will be a great merit. The sacrifice of our 100,000 cavalry will be worth it. General, please grant our wish. I'll grant your wish. At this moment, Fong Dingshan really wanted to shout loudly. However, because he was too emotional, he could not say anything. Fong Dingshan still did not speak. Mu Qiong was somewhat disappointed. He even looked down on Fong Dingshan a little. Civil officials would advise to the death, while military officials would fight to the death. This seemed to be a matter of course. As a great general, he had to be prepared to die on the battlefield at any time. How could he be afraid? Mu Qiong sighed in his heart. When they were discussing the military plan, he did not call Fong Dingshan. Now that the situation had changed, there was no need to care about Fong Dingshan's attitude. In any case, he was going to give it his all. Seeing that he did not receive a response, he simply turned and left. Instead of explaining, he might as well take the opportunity to sleep a little more. That way, he would have a better mind for the battle tomorrow. Fong Dingshan finally recovered. When he found out that his general was not going to surrender, but was going to fight to the death, he was extremely happy. Now, he only wanted to get on the horse and fight with everyone. Speaking of which, his martial arts were not bad. However, when he wanted to look for Mu Qiong, he found that he was no longer there. After asking the bodyguard standing not far away, he found out that Mu Qiong had returned to his tent to sleep. Forget it, let him rest for a night. This general will explain to him tomorrow morning. I also want to have a good sleep. Fong Dingshan was in a good mood. He was very much in favor of the military plan to counterattack and rush back to Chiyun Mountain. This was the only way he could fight with his life. The knot in his heart was untied. When Fong Dingshan entered the tent, he was still a little excited. Most of the night passed. When it was almost dawn, he fell asleep in a daze. Less than an hour after he fell asleep, suddenly, the sound of war drums rang out. It woke him up abruptly. Then he heard panicked shouts. Enemy attack, get up quickly. Chapter 1343. At this time, outside the big tent of the northern Ming Kingdom's Liaodong cavalry, bright red 5-star flags stood in great numbers. Looking from afar, the dense cavalry had already surrounded this temporary stronghold in all directions. The 1st Cavalry Division didn't rest for the whole night. Instead, they were constantly searching for traces of the enemy. Finally, when it was almost dawn, they found a large stronghold. The commander of the 5th Cavalry Division, Gong Feng, who was in charge of searching this area, ordered his men to heavily surround this place. Gong Feng did not give the order to attack immediately. He had already made a rough calculation. There were only about 2,000 northern Ming cavalrymen that were surrounded. He had led 5 regiments of 4,000 elite cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, he had twice the number of the enemy. In terms of combat strength, he was full of confidence. What was there to be brave about? What was there to be afraid of? In the previous telegram, Yang Chendong emphasized that these original Baiming Liaodong cavalry were all elites. They had consumed a lot of money and food from the Baiming Emperor to create them. If they could be used as their own, it would save a lot of training time. Wasn't the 1st Cavalry Division going to be expanded by a division? Excellent soldiers were essential. If they captured these Baiming cavalry, it would save a lot of effort. Gong Feng, who had his own plans, didn't immediately attack. He wanted to take a look and carefully observe these Baiming cavalry. He wanted to see if they had the qualifications to become soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army. He wanted to properly lock them up. As for whether or not these people would be able to escape from his hands, Gong Feng was even less worried. He had brought along the elite soldiers of the 5th Regiment, and he still had many excellent Big Dipper crossbows in his hands that he had yet to use. If these people were really very brave, not to mention other things, if a wave of crossbows were released, would he still be afraid that they would be able to overturn the sky? Even if they didn't have 7-star crossbows, with the 1st Cavalry Division's elite cavalry, how could they be afraid of these 2,000 Baiming cavalry? Gong Feng's face was full of pride and confidence, but when he spoke, he didn't have the slightest intention of underestimating the enemy. Men, surround this place. Don't be careless. I believe everyone understands the principle of cornered beasts fighting. Battalion commanders, go do it. The 10 battalion commanders immediately gave a standard military salute before turning around and heading back to their respective units. The camp was completely surrounded. When Fang Dingshan, Mu Qiong, and the others woke up from their tents, this was the scene that greeted them. They were surrounded by the cavalry of the 5-star army. Not far away, there was a large flag that was fluttering in the wind. The words 1st Cavalry Division of the World were written on it. Their expressions became somewhat unsightly. In the past, Fang Dingshan thought that his Baiming Liaodong cavalry was the best cavalry in the world, and that no one could match them. Naturally, he had done a detailed investigation on the elite cavalry of the 5-star army. He had naturally heard of the reputation of the 1st Cavalry Division. All this while, Fang Dingshan's wish was to find the 1st Cavalry Division and fight them. He wanted to see who was the strongest cavalry in the world. However, because the other party had been fighting in the inner region, he hadn't found a suitable opportunity. Now, he finally met them, and under such circumstances, he couldn't help but curse his bad luck. Why did they have to meet the 1st Cavalry Division when they were defeated? This way, this battle wouldn't be fair at all, and it would be extremely difficult to win. Especially when he saw that the other party's troops were in formation and had already surrounded them, Fang Dingshan had a bad feeling. In comparison, Mu Qiong didn't think too much. Perhaps this was the difference between a general and a deputy general. He didn't have the ability to see through the entire battle. He was only thinking about how to get out of here because if they couldn't get out, they wouldn't be able to launch a surprise attack on Chiyun Mountain, and they wouldn't be able to make a last stand. Men, charge out. If we're lucky enough to get out, we'll gather at the foot of Chiyun Mountain. Mu Qiong was afraid that if this dragged on, their forces would fall to a freezing point, so he quickly gave the order to charge. As soon as he gave the order, the other Baiming Liaodong cavalry mounted their horses and raised their sabers. They let out a battle cry and charged in all directions without any pattern. This shocked Fang Dingshan. He didn't have enough troops to begin with, and now that they were charging in such a disorderly manner, how could they possibly win the battle? He couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Don't charge! Everyone, retreat! Retreat! Fang Dingshan's original intention was for the entire army to retreat, reorganize, and charge in one direction. With the 2,000 elite Baiming Liaodong cavalry, it was very possible for them to charge out. However, charging in such a disorderly manner was not advisable. However, no one could understand his thoughts, especially when Mu Qiong had misunderstood him. Seeing that the army was charging and Fang Dingshan was still shouting nonstop, Mu Qiong's eyes flashed with anger. What's wrong? Are you still thinking of surrendering at this time? Since you don't have any backbone, don't blame me. With this thought in mind, Mu Qiong's right hand suddenly made a sound and the cavalry saber suddenly slashed towards Fang Dingshan's back. This was Fang Dingshan's fault. He wanted to explain what happened last night, so he purposely got closer to Mu Qiong. However, because he was too close, he didn't even have time to react when Mu Qiong suddenly attacked. His entire back was hit, and the intense pain caused him to lose all his strength. He couldn't stop himself from falling off his horse. This sudden scene shocked all of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry. They didn't think that there would be internal strife before the battle even began. However, Mu Qiong's reaction wasn't slow either. He shouted, Fang Dingshan wants to surrender to the 5-star army. My soldiers and I are loyal soldiers. How can we allow such a thing to happen? From now on, if anyone dares to talk about surrendering, they will be like this person. Come charge out. Fang Dingshan's martial arts were quite good. He was able to become the Imperial Guard commander of the substitute emperor. He had good martial arts. In the past few years, he had trained his horse skills quite a bit. His strength had increased by a lot. If they were face to face, Mu Qiong probably wouldn't be able to last more than 3 rounds. However, after a successful sneak attack, Fang Dingshan was seriously injured. This scene was also heard by the other Baiming Liaodong cavalry. They knew that their general's strength was far inferior to theirs. Even when their general wanted to surrender, he ended up like this. How could they dare to have any other thoughts? After learning from the previous example, the other Baiming Liaodong cavalry weren't willing to give up their lives. After they woke up from their shock, they yelled and charged towards the neatly arranged 1st Cavalry Division's 5-star army. Prepare the crossbows. Try not to kill people. Focus on injuring people. Fire the crossbows. Commander Gong Feng, who was riding on his horse, commanded loudly. Following his order, a series of 7-star crossbows were fired at a flat angle. Their target was the first batch of Baiming Liaodong cavalry. The ancient people used bows to test their arm strength and eyesight. Especially arm strength. If they didn't have enough strength, they wouldn't be able to fully draw the bow. Naturally, the power would be limited. Even if they could fully draw the bow, they would only feel tired after shooting one arrow. They would need to rest for a while before shooting the second arrow. As the elites of the cavalry, they naturally wouldn't be so weak that they could only shoot one arrow. They could usually shoot 3 arrows in a row before their arms would feel numb and sore. There were even those who were born with great strength who could shoot 4 or 5 arrows. Just like the legendary Ho Yi, he was a person who could shoot 9 arrows in a row. In the eyes of archers, he was a powerful existence. To use a bow, one must have enough arm strength. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very effective. However, with the continuous development of technology, like the appearance of the 7-star crossbow, shooting arrows became simple. One only needed to load the front of the crossbow and pull the bow to fully draw it once. Then, 7 arrows could be shot. This saved a lot of effort and had great power. Facing such a tyrannical weapon, how could the Baiming Liaodong cavalry block it? With just the sound of the trigger being pulled, the crossbow bolts rained down like rain. The 500 Northern Ming Liaodong cavalry charging at the front were all shot down by the crossbow bolts. The seemingly powerful attack also stopped because of this. Then, their morale plummeted. This also caused the hundreds of Baiming Liaodong cavalry who were preparing to charge to stop. They were humans, not gods. Facing arrows that could take their lives, they had to show hesitation. This hesitation caused their morale to plummet. The Baiming Liaodong cavalry, who were still red-eyed and wanted to charge, had their combat power reduced by more than a level. This scene was also seen by Mu Qiong, who was behind them. From the moment he slashed Fang Dingshan with his saber, he had already gone crazy. Now that he saw that the front troops were injured and the middle troops were not moving forward, he was immediately enraged. "Come on, charge with me." Mu Qiong was afraid that their morale would drop and they would lose the opportunity to charge out of the encirclement. He was prepared to charge himself and set an example. "Come." Gong Feng also let out a loud cry. When he saw another armored general charge out from the enemy camp with less than 200 men beside him, he also laughed out loud and leaped forward. As Gong Feng rushed out, a battalion of 400 cavalrymen followed behind him. Their duty was to protect the safety of their commander. Gong Fengchong had his reasons. Just like how the Northern Ming Liaodong cavalry always wanted to have a direct PK with the world's 1st Cavalry Division, how could they not have this idea? Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, Gong Feng immediately seized it and leapt out. One side had 400 people, while the other side had 200. Although there was a difference in numbers, it wasn't too big. If the Baiming Liaodong cavalry were really elite, they could make up for this difference. Just like how the 1st Cavalry Division dared to attack thousands of enemy cavalry with only a few hundred people. Chapter 1344. Both sides had a total of more than 600 people, and they quickly approached each other under the urging of their warhorses. It was a battle of life and death, which attracted everyone's attention. It could be imagined that if Mu Qiong won, the Baiming Liaodong cavalry's morale would be greatly boosted, and they would be able to unleash 100% of their strength and break out of the encirclement. On the other hand, if Gong Fengxing won, the rest of the Northern Ming dynasty's Liaodong cavalry would probably all surrender. This would save them from a battle of weapons and blood. Both sides had their own goals, and they quickly approached each other before clashing. Mu Qiong, who was the first to charge, chose Gong Feng as his target. He had already noticed that this person was different from ordinary people, and he was wearing a flashy black battle robe. Based on his experience, he should be the commanding general of the 1st Cavalry Division, and if he could take down this person, it would definitely be a heavy blow to the 5-star army's morale, and it would be much easier to win. Gong Feng also targeted Mu Qiong, although he didn't know who this person was and didn't know his true identity. But judging from the armor he was wearing, his position shouldn't be too low. Only by severely injuring such a person would he be able to give the Baiming Liaodong cavalry enough respect and threat, which was what he wanted. Both of them had the same goal, and this caused the moment they met each other, the collision of their sabers caused a heart-trembling sound. Dang dang dang. In just one exchange, both of them slashed out 3 times, and then their bodies shook, and their horses moved to the side. The outcome of the first round was actually a draw. This was out of everyone's expectations. The difference was that Mu Qiong revealed a shocked expression. He was a famous general among the 100,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry. Other than General Fang Dingshan and Deputy General Luo Baikuan, he didn't put anyone else in his eyes when it came to fighting. It was the same when he faced Gong Feng. In his opinion, with his strength, it wasn't impossible to take down this person in 1 round. But who would have thought that he wouldn't be able to do anything? Gong Feng's ability was out of Mu Qiong's expectations, and his original confidence began to fade rapidly. He began to suspect that he couldn't break out of the encirclement and leave this place. In comparison, Gong Feng's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Yang Chendong had said more than once that there was always someone better out there. There was no such thing as the strongest. In the past, Gong Feng didn't really approve of them, especially when their opponents were Baiming cavalry. He didn't even put them in his eyes. How could these people, whose legs turned to jelly the moment they saw the Mongolian cavalry, be a match for him? And just now, after the exchange with Mu Qiong, he realized that there were also powerful people in the Baiming army. This reignited his fighting spirit. While he stopped looking down on his opponent, his left hand unconsciously reached for his waist. There was a saber there. It was the dual saber technique that everyone in the 1st Cavalry Division had to learn. It could be used to win and save lives at critical moments. The two of them rode back. Regardless of whether they were willing or not, another clash had begun. As the warhorses of both sides continued to accelerate, the distance between them grew closer and closer. Soon after, the sound of collisions could be heard again. In a short period of time, Mu Qiong had continuously slashed out 3 times with his saber. The first 2 of the 3 slashes were still a clash. Their strengths were equally matched. But when it came to the 3rd slash, Gong Feng seemed to have no strength to attack. He changed from slashing to blocking. Gong Feng seemed to be exhausted. When Mu Qiong saw this, he was naturally overjoyed. He originally thought that his opponent was a fierce man. If that was the case, it would be difficult for him to win. If he wasn't careful, he might even lose his life here. But this 3rd slash had reignited his hope. He used all his strength and slashed out a 4th time when the 2 horses were about to cross paths. He wanted to see how he would block the 4th slash if he already had to block the 3rd slash. Mu Qiong had a confident smile on his face, as if victory was already in sight. But this smile quickly froze on his face. Because when he slashed out for the 4th time, he suddenly felt a pain in his back. Because of this, more than half of the strength in his body dissipated. The saber that he forcefully slashed out only hit the edge of Gong Feng's saber before it bounced back. This was all thanks to the fact that the 2 horses had already separated. Otherwise, if Gong Feng counterattacked while he was injured, Mu Qiong wouldn't have been able to escape even if he wanted to. The 2 horses separated for the 2nd time. The distance between them increased. When they reached a certain point, Gong Feng turned his horse around. At this moment, his eyes were glowing. Just now, he had drawn his other saber and attacked Mu Qiong with his left saber. This also meant that his next opponent was only a disabled person. Naturally, he was full of confidence. He wanted to see how his opponent would fare in the next clash. Gong Feng was in high spirits. He was ready for the next clash. Mu Qiong's expression was much worse. The back of his waist was still bleeding. His strength was also fading. If he didn't have great willpower, he might have already fallen off his horse. Mu Qiong forced himself to take a deep breath and recover his energy. As he turned his horse around, he also tore off a piece of his battle robe and wrapped it around his waist. Although this was of limited use, it could at least slow down the flow of blood. This gave him the strength to fight again. Charge! After feeling better and regaining some of his strength, Mu Qiong shouted again and charged in Gong Feng's direction. When two armies fought, there would naturally be chaos. Most of the time, it would be a chaotic battle. This depended on the strength of each army and their understanding of formations. But in a chaotic battle, everyone was in danger. After all, no one knew where a saber would suddenly come from and take your life. Thus, luck played a large part in a big battle. This was also why most generals wouldn't take the initiative to charge. If they were unlucky and were struck by a saber the moment they charged into the enemy camp, wouldn't they die an unjust death? As for the battle between the generals of both sides, that was even more impossible. Think about how difficult it was to nurture a general. Why would they waste it in a one-on-one battle? That was only done in movies and TV dramas to create a tense and exciting atmosphere. But now, the real scene was really happening. Gong Feng and Mu Qiong were really in a one-on-one battle to the death. The other warriors and soldiers also saw this, but no one went to stop him. Perhaps they had been warned before, or perhaps they were full of confidence in their general. Since no one stopped them, Mu Qiong could only brace himself and charge forward. If it was any other time, he could retreat if he was injured and no one would say anything. But now, he was Baiming the Liaodong cavalry's morale was tied to him. If he was defeated and retreated, the result could be imagined. There would be no chance for a comeback. In order to survive, in order to appear at the foot of Qiyun Mountain and deal a fatal blow to Yang Qindong, Mu Qiong was going all out. Ayaya! He shouted loudly as if he wanted to convey all his strength through his mouth. Mu Qiong was getting closer and closer to Gong Feng. Then, he raised his saber high and slashed down from the sky. At this time, Mu Qiong had given up on defense. He only cared about attacking. Even if he died, he would severely injure Gong Feng to prove his strength. Gong Feng was not frightened by the other party's shouting. On the contrary, he stopped his warhorse. He did not want to give the other party a chance to turn back. The other party was already injured. Next, it was time for him to expand his victory. Relying on the horse's momentum and speed, Mu Qiong-yuan's saber strike was not weak. With just one strike, he was able to bend Gong Feng's body, who had raised his saber to block. Mu Qiong's face flashed with a full smile. He was confident that he now had the upper hand. Next, as long as the other party relaxed, he would be able to cut Gong Feng in half. But when he still had that smile on his face, his abdomen hurt again. Another saber appeared and slashed in front of him. At this moment, Mu Qiong finally knew how he was injured, but it was too late. When blood flew out in front of and behind him, he had less than 20% of his strength left. It was already extremely difficult for him to stand on his horse. How could he have the strength to fight to the death? Due to the excessive blood loss, Mu Qiong's body became weak and his vision became blurry. Mu Qiong could vaguely see a blade coming towards the door. He instinctively wanted to dodge, but his reaction was already very slow. Just as he moved his head slightly, the blade had already landed on his neck. His aorta was cut open and blood spurted out. With a plop, Mu Qiong, who had no strength left, fell off his horse. He fell to the ground and twitched for a moment before he stopped breathing. Mu Qiong was dead. He died under Gong Feng's two sabers. And the moment he fell to the ground, Gong Feng had already bent over and stood up. His head was still covered in blood in his hand. A loud shout immediately rang out on the battlefield. The enemy general is dead. Do you still want to continue struggling? Surrender and you will be spared. Surrender and you'll be spared. The 4,000 brave soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division also shouted in unison. The 4,000 people shouted in unison, giving one a feeling of covering the sun. In that instant, some of the more cowardly Baiming Liaodong cavalry already couldn't help but throw away the sabers in their hands. Their faces were filled with horror. On the battlefield, there weren't many left of the 200 cavalry Mu Qiong brought. They didn't have enough troops to begin with, and their morale was low. How could they be a match for the 5-star army's cavalry? Not to mention, after a series of fierce battles, many Baiming Liaodong cavalry's sabers were already broken in half. They couldn't pose any threat or harm to the enemy at all. How could they possibly win without even having weapons? This was where the 5-star army's strength lay. This was especially true for an elite cavalry troop like the 1st Cavalry Division. The sabers in their hands were all forged in the Crimson City's arsenal. Be it in terms of sharpness or toughness, they were far superior to other swords. Chapter 1345. Perhaps nothing could be seen at the beginning of the collision, but after a long time, it was very common for weapons to break. The soldiers were brave, the weapons were elite, and the rewards and punishments were clear. It was hard to find anyone who could be a match for such a team. Shouts rang out from all directions. With every shout, the 4,500 cavalrymen would take a step forward. Under this kind of intimidation, killing intent surged forth. More and more northern Ming Liaodong cavalrymen threw their weapons to the ground. There were even some who were frightened by this momentum and had already dismounted and knelt on the ground, acting as if they were surrendering. Mu Qiong was killed and his head was cut off. Now, it was on Gong Feng's cavalry sword. Fang Dingshan was injured and fell to the ground. He could no longer ride or command the army. Without their commander, the northern Ming Liaodong cavalry finally saw the situation clearly. They knew that they had lost the upper hand. Immediately, more and more of them threw down their weapons and surrendered. Of the 2,000 cavalry, 600 were killed or injured. The rest surrendered. After surrendering, Gong Feng knew what kind of big fish he had encountered this time. He had killed the 3rd fierce general of the Baiming Liaodong cavalry, Mu Qiong, and captured the Baiming general Fang Dingshan. This was definitely a great achievement. Laughing heartily, Gong Feng immediately ordered the scouts to spread the news in all directions. After that, he brought the 5 regiments of warriors and personally escorted the 1,600 northern Ming cavalrymen to the main camp. The poor Fang Dingshan was being carried under a simple stretcher. The wounds on his body had been treated, and he was no longer bleeding. His mouth was also stuffed with a piece of cloth that someone had used before, and it smelled very bad. This was not to humiliate him, but to prevent him from biting his tongue and committing suicide. On Qiyun Mountain, Yang Chendong and 2,000 Black Knight Dragon Guards had already finished cleaning up the battlefield. An incomparably huge dying monastery and more than 10 smaller dying monasteries had already been built. There were simply too many severed heads. It was impossible to put them all together, so they could only be divided into a dozen or so. However, it was precisely because of this that it gave off a very frightening feeling from afar. It was as if there were countless severed heads. When Division Commander Tian, who brought the 1st Star Army to the foot of Qiyun Mountain, he saw this scene. At this moment, even Division Commander Tian, who had killed countless people and never feared any enemy, had a shocked expression. He could no longer count the number of heads in front of him. Were these all killed by the Black Cavalry? They only had 2,000 people. How did they do it? Even if they used firearms, it was 2,000 against 100,000. If they were careless and the enemy cavalry charged up the mountain, the consequences would be very serious. Although he had always been modest on the surface, Tian, who was very prideful deep down, he believed that no one in the 5-Star Army was a match for them in terms of cold weapons. Even the Black Cavalry by his teacher's side was only on par with them. But now, this thought had to change. The Black Cavalry was the Black Cavalry. It was not something that the 1st Cavalry Division could compare to. In just this battle alone, they had killed tens of thousands of enemies. Their opponent was the Baiming Liaodong Cavalry. They were the most elite existence in the Baiming army, and could be compared to the Imperial Army in the capital. This was because the Black Cavalry's main mission was to protect Yang Chendong and did not have many opportunities to kill enemies. If they were like the 1st Cavalry Division and participated in every battle, their achievements would be much greater than his. Tian, who had a frightened expression, But he did not think that it was precisely because the Baiming Liaodong cavalry that they had strict military discipline that they left tens of thousands of corpses here. If it was any other Baiming army, most of the people would have run away as soon as the guns were fired. How could they kill so many people? On the mountain, Yang Chendong had already seen Tianhu's army appear. At this point, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Yang Chendong was a little nervous. This was not because he was afraid that the enemy would return. With the firearms and ammunition prepared on the mountain, it would not be a problem if 100,000 enemies came. He was nervous because he did not want to kill more Han soldiers. Before, he had no choice. It was either you die or I die. Of course, he had to protect himself. Now that Tianhu had appeared here with his army, it was enough to prove that the situation was settled. At least he did not have to kill Han soldiers. This was enough to let him breathe a sigh of relief. After Tianhu arrived and saw Yang Chendong on the mountain, his expression became more respectful and he greeted his teacher. Yang Chendong could guess that Tianhu must have been shaken by the news. This was also good. He could remind him from time to time so that he would not become arrogant. Therefore, in the following time, he did not introduce too much about the Battle of Chiyun Mountain. Instead, he lightly skimmed over it. He only said that the Black Cavalry risked their lives and Baiming Liaodong cavalry could not withstand a single blow. However, these words, in Tianhu's ears, made him even more frightened. The Baiming Liaodong cavalry was the elite Baiming army. How could they not withstand a single blow? Didn't this show the strength of his teacher and the Black Cavalry under his feet? The battle on the mountain was skimmed over. Yang Chendong mainly asked about the situation below the mountain. After learning that nearly 50,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry had been captured, he nodded his head in satisfaction. Good, this battle was well fought. Weren't you worried about the lack of soldiers when you expanded the army? Now that you have tens of thousands of people, the problem can be solved. Yes, student thanks teacher. Tianhu's face was filled with joy after hearing this. He believed that after the 1st Cavalry Division was expanded, its combat strength would definitely increase by a large level. The victory of the Battle of Chiyun Mountain meant that Baiming's military forces would completely withdraw from the grasslands. Moreover, for a certain period of time, they would not have the opportunity and ability to provoke the 5-star army. With the defeat of the 100,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry, the 100,000 infantrymen led by Gao Yu in front of the beginning city became turtles in a jar. The Baiming Liaodong cavalry was defeated and captured. The 70,000 reinforcements sent by Tulu City were cut off and surrounded. The Tulu City's defenders retreated. Only 10,000 of the 50,000 soldiers escaped. Nearly 40,000 soldiers were captured, and a large amount of provisions and military supplies were seized. This battle could be said to be a crushing defeat for the Baiming army. At this time, Gao Yu did not know about this. He was still anxiously waiting for the reinforcements to appear. With a heart full of fighting spirit, when Gao Yu led the army out of Tulu City, everything was so smooth. Taking down Saihan Mountain and attacking the outer city of the beginning city gave him the feeling that the 5-star army was just SOSO. As long as he attacked with all his strength, he could achieve great success. At that time, it would not be difficult for him to be conferred the title of Marquis. At that time, he was full of confidence and seemed to have endless strength in everything he did. But then there was a sudden change in the battle. The 5-star army suddenly launched a counterattack. Like a thunder from the sky, he was completely shocked and stunned. Countless cavalrymen of the 5-star army seemed to have emerged from the ground and surrounded them. Any infantrymen who dared to rush out were either killed or captured. After several attempts, and after losing more than 10,000 soldiers, Gao Yu finally became obedient. Gao Yu, who was surrounded, could only put his hope on the reinforcements at this moment. He thought in his heart that there were still 100,000 Baiming Liaodong cavalry and 100,000 infantrymen who had not appeared. He still had the ability to turn the situation around. While constantly strengthening the defense of the camp, he hoped for the reinforcements to appear. But soon, 5 days passed, and he did not see any reinforcements. What was worse was that there was not much food left in the camp. The front line's attack was too smooth, and Gao Yu was a bit arrogant. The speed of the march was too fast, and the logistics could not keep up. Now, the weakness of the lack of food was finally exposed. There were more than 100,000 soldiers, and there were also tens of thousands of injured soldiers. If there was no food to eat, there was no need for the 5-star army to attack. Gao Yu would not be able to survive. This kind of predicament made his face extremely ugly. He had been sitting in the tent until it was almost dark. Then, a soldier came to report that the messenger of the 5-star army had arrived and they had something to say. The war is not over, it is not over. Hearing that the messenger of the 5-star army appeared at this time, Gao Yu angrily shouted. As long as the reinforcements arrived, he could still play with the center of the camp. This was what he was counting on. After shouting for a while, the anger in his heart was almost vented. Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie, who were standing next to him, looked at each other and nodded. Li Keguang lightly coughed and said, "Military supervisor, since they are here, why don't we meet them? Our great Ming is a nation of etiquette." "That's right, even if we meet them, we can't lose a piece of meat. If they say something unpleasant, we can just kick them out of the tent. There's no need to get angry over them." Hou Xiangjie also smiled as he expressed his opinion. The two generals were trying to persuade him, and Gao Yu's face gradually became calm. "Okay, then I'll give you two some face and meet them. I want to see what they have to say." Gao Yu's face was normal and he couldn't help but straighten his body. At this moment, he still paid attention to his appearance. Perhaps in his heart he still thought that he represented the Baiming Celestial Empire and that the 5-star army was nothing more than Bugnam of Gojoseon's personal product. How could a king be compared to an emperor? Li Keguang and Hou Xiangjie hurriedly gave a look to the guard who entered the tent to report. The guard immediately nodded and retreated. Not long after, a young man wearing a green military uniform with 2 bars and 4 stars on his chest walked into the tent with his head held high and his chest puffed out. The person who came in was 8 feet tall. As soon as he entered the tent, he was like an iron tower that blocked the light coming in from outside, giving people a very imposing feeling. At this moment, Gao Yu suddenly had a feeling of darkness in front of his eyes, which made him very unhappy. He opened his mouth and said impatiently, "Who is it? What business do you have with this military supervisor?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.